The wind came down from the mountain passes every morning before the settlement woke. It had always done this. It would do it again tomorrow. Nobody on Voss had ever thought to record it, because there was nothing unusual about it. Wind moves through mountain passes. Stone sits in highland earth. Morning comes after dark. These were not things that required documentation. These were simply the conditions of the world. Background, constant, permanent. The wind did not know what was coming. The stones did not know. The cave, 200 meters below the highland ridge, knew something, but it had always known. That was not new information. That was simply what the cave was. What was new, what had been slowly, quietly becoming new for 3 months now, was the woman who climbed the ridge every morning before the highland lit and sat among the stones above the cave entrance and watched. She had not gone inside yet. She was being precise about preparation. Her name was Sorveth of the Third Dreaming. In the Voss tradition, a name like that carries more information than most names do. The Third Dreaming is not a rank. It is not a title awarded by committee or confirmed by elder approval. It is a threshold, the point in a mystic's development where the visions shift from personal sight to collective sight, where the dreaming stops being about the self and starts being about the people. Sorveth had crossed that threshold 3 years ago. She remembered the exact morning. The vision was specific and detailed, and nothing like what she had expected collective sight to feel like. She had expected something expansive, something larger than herself. Instead, it felt like a door, narrow, cold, and opening in both directions simultaneously. She had written it down in both columns, what I saw, and then what I think it means. She had been writing in 2 columns ever since. The month of Velamun had arrived quietly, the way it always did on Voss, not with a change in temperature or a shift in weather, but with a quality of darkness in the evenings that felt slightly heavier than the month before. Velamun was the month of deep dreaming. The mystic records described it as the season when vision came most easily and most honestly. Sorveth had always found this partially true. Vision came easily in Velamun. Whether it came honestly was a separate question, and one she had learned not to assume the answer to. This particular morning, she had arrived at the stone circle before the sky had lightened. She sat on the flat ground between 2 of the standing stones, the highland rock still cold from the night, and opened her recording surface. It was a flat grey stone, smooth on one face, small enough to carry but substantial enough that it did not feel fragile. She had used the same recording surface for 2 years. It had absorbed enough notation that the older layers had to be carefully cleared to make room for new ones, and the clearing always carried the slight risk of losing something she had meant to keep. She had learned to be very selective about what she kept. The previous night's vision was, by any honest assessment, unremarkable. A patrol path. 2 Voss Commandos moving along a specific route in the eastern ridge sector, approaching a junction point she recognized from the Highland maps. The vision had been clear, the kind of clear that comes from good sleep and a settled mind, not the distorted clarity of exhaustion or anxiety. She had recorded it carefully, both columns. On the left, 2 commandos, eastern ridge, approaching the second junction before the stone shelf. On the right, patrol verification, standard confirmation vision, no anomaly. She closed the record. She looked down the slope. 200 meters of switchback trail, loose rock, low highland scrub, and the particular grey-green colour that Voss rock takes on in the hour before sunrise. And at the base, the cave entrance. She had been looking at it for 3 months. She had not gone inside. The entrance to Sel-Makor was not dramatic. That was the first thing she had noted when she had first climbed to this position and looked down. She had expected something that announced itself, something the eye would go to. The mystic records described it in elevated language. The sealed place, the breathing dark, the threshold of the deeper knowing. She had read those descriptions and built an image in her mind of something that would match them. The entrance was a gap in the highland rock, roughly 2 meters high, perhaps 1.5 meters wide at its broadest point. The stone around it was the same grey as the rest of the highland. The interior was dark in the way all cave interiors are dark before the light fully arrives. Nothing about it looked different from 100 other cave openings in the Voss Mountains. And that was the second thing she had noted. She had written it in the observation column and then sat for a long time looking at the conclusion column. She had written nothing. She had cleared the space and moved to the next entry. She was precise about what she could and could not support. The highland around her was beginning its slow brightening now. Not sunrise, that was still 20 minutes away. But the darkness was thinning at the upper edges, the sky shifting from black to the deep blue that comes just before colour returns. The twin moons of Voss had set an hour ago. In their absence, the highland felt very wide and very still. Sorveth sat among the stones and let the stillness settle into her bones, the way cold settles in, gradually, comprehensively, without announcement. She was not afraid of the cave. This was important to her. Fear would contaminate the record. Fear would bleed from the observation column into the conclusion column in ways she might not notice until it was too late. She had spent 3 months developing the discipline of approaching Sel-Makor as a subject of observation rather than as a source of dread. The discipline was not natural. It was not something the mystic tradition had taught her directly. The tradition's approach to Sel-Makor was closer to reverent avoidance, a kind of respectful not looking that had served the Voss for centuries. But respectful not looking had not produced a record of what the cave actually was. And the outsiders were here now. The ones from the Empire and the ones from the Republic. Both of them looking. Both of them with their own questions and their own purposes. Both of them with access to the Highland perimeter that the Voss diplomatic framework had reluctantly extended, because the elder mystics had received a vision. One of them, at least, claimed to have received a vision, indicating that the outsider presence was inevitable and therefore necessary to understand. Sorveth had not been shown that vision. She had asked to review it. The request had been acknowledged and then quietly not followed up on. She had noted this in the observation column. The conclusion column remained, as always, a subject of careful restraint. The commandos stationed at the cave perimeter changed shifts at first light. She could see the 2 figures from here, small in the distance, visible at the edge of the perimeter marking. They moved in the unhurried way of soldiers who have been standing for 6 hours and know that relief is coming and know better than to rush the last minutes of a long watch. Their equipment caught the first grey light and gave it back as dull reflections. She watched them until the shift change was complete. 2 figures leaving, 2 figures arriving. A brief exchange. She couldn't hear it from here, but she knew the format. Standard handoff. Post conditions. Anomaly report. Equipment status. Voss Commando training was thorough and consistent. The soldiers who stood watch at Sel-Makor were not specifically told to watch for anything. They were told to note anything that departed from the previous watch's conditions. She had asked the senior commando once what the most common anomaly was. He had said, sound. Soldiers report sound when there is no wind. She had written that in the observation column. In the conclusion column, she had written, "I will verify this myself when I am inside." She had not yet gone inside. 300 standard light years away. 3 days from Voss by Imperial military transport. Varric Thane was reviewing his mission briefing for the 7th time. He was aware this was the 7th time. He had not intended to read it 7 times. The first 3 readings had been functional, absorbing information, checking for inconsistencies, building the mental architecture of the assignment. The 4th and 5th had been verification, cross-checking the briefing's claims against the supplemental intelligence files he had accessed independently before departure. The 6th had been, if he was being honest with himself, closer to concern than to professional review. The 7th was honesty. He put the data pad down on the transport's fold-out desk and looked at it. The briefing was 43 pages. Standard Imperial Intelligence Mission Architecture. Objective statement, operational parameters, resource allocation, known variables, threat assessment. It was thorough. He had worked with briefings that were considerably less thorough, on assignments that were considerably more dangerous, and he had appreciated thoroughness in those cases. This briefing had a problem. The problem was on page 17. A block of text, formatted correctly, properly justified, in the standard typeface that Imperial Intelligence used for all field documents. The block was the correct length for a threat assessment subsection. The content of the block was entirely redacted, and black, flat, giving nothing back. He had seen redactions before. They were common in intelligence work. They indicated need-to-know restrictions, ongoing operational classifications, information above the clearance level of the document's recipient. His clearance level was high enough that he had never encountered a redaction in a document addressed specifically to him. He looked at the block for a long time. Then he picked up his field log. The log was his own, not an Imperial-issued format, though he followed the standard documentation protocols his training required. He had added one structural element that training had not required: a second column. Everything he observed in the left column, everything he concluded from those observations in the right column, strictly separated. Always. He opened to the current entry page. In the observation column, he wrote, "Briefing, page 17, threat assessment subsection, redacted in full. Document addressed to my clearance level." He looked at the conclusion column. He wrote, "Someone is managing what I'm allowed to know." He closed the log. He looked at the viewport. Voss was still 3 days away. A pale shape at the edge of sensor range, small and grey-green, and giving nothing back from this distance. The planet looked unremarkable, small, cold at the edges, mountainous. Nothing about it at this range suggested it was worth 3 days of transit time on a military transport that smelled of recycled air, and the particular metallic undertone of equipment that had been in service too long. He had travelled to worse assignments on better ships. He had never travelled to an assignment with a redacted threat assessment. He made a second entry in the observation column: 3 Sith rank operatives sent to this assignment before me, all classified under the same operational designation. None of them are listed in the supplemental files as available for debrief. Standard procedure when an operative is deceased. Also standard when an operative has been reclassified as a sensitive asset. Also occasionally used for other reasons that are not listed as standard procedure. Conclusion, column. I need more information than I have. He noted this without alarm. Alarm was not useful. Alarm contaminated the record. He closed the field log. He looked at the viewport for a while longer. The transport was deep in hyperspace now. The visual feed outside the viewport was the empty between space that military vessels moved through too fast to contemplate. It looked like nothing. It felt like pressure applied from all directions at once. He had traveled by hyperspace enough times that the transit itself no longer bothered him. The transition still did, slightly. That moment of dislocation, in and out, when the galaxy blinked and expected you to blink back. He had learned not to dwell on the transition. There were things he had learned not to dwell on. He reached for the briefing again. He did not open it. He simply set it aside, in the specific position that indicated it had been reviewed and required no further immediate action. A small discipline, one of many. His training had given him a great number of small disciplines, and he had found, over the course of a career, that had taken him to places that required careful management of the mind, that the small disciplines were what kept the larger structures intact. Keep the columns separate. Keep the record clean. Keep the conclusions supported. Do not read the briefing an 8th time. He folded the desk back against the transport wall. He turned off the main light, leaving only the low operational lighting that military vessels maintain during rest cycles. He lay down on the bunk, narrow, firm, standard issue, the kind of surface that does not invite sleep so much as permit it. He closed his eyes. He thought, without meaning to, about the redacted block, about what the threat assessment might have said, about 3 Sith Lords who had entered a cave and come back as something different. This was speculation, he noted internally, not in the official log, but in the quieter record that ran continuously behind the official one. He did not know they had come back changed. He knew they were not available for debrief. These were different facts. He was trained not to confuse them. He was confusing them slightly. He noted this. He set it aside. He did not sleep well. Voss was still 3 days away. The highland had fully brightened now. Sorveth stood. The cold from the rock had moved through her sitting bones and settled into her lower back. The familiar stiffness of a highland morning spent on stone, which she had learned to treat as simple information rather than complaint. She gathered her recording surface. She tucked it into the carry wrap at her side. She looked down at the cave entrance one more time. The light had reached it now. The grey mouth of Sel-Makor was visible in full morning sun. Exactly what it had looked like yesterday and the day before, jammin' for 3 months of mornings preceding that. Still. Dark inside. Still. She turned and walked up the path toward Voss Commando. She did not look back. Behind her the stone circle stood as it had always stood. The dark highland rock, the tilted stone at its slow angle, the short shadows the morning sun threw toward the cave entrance below. The wind came down from the passes again, as it always did when the highland warmed. It moved through the outer chambers of Sel-Makor in the way that wind moves through openings in rock. At certain angles, it produced a sound, low, cycling, patient. The stones did not react to it. They had heard it before. The transport set down at Voss Commando's imperial arrival point at the ascendant hour. That was the imperial designation. The Voss Commandos standing at the perimeter used a different one. They called it First Light, same hour, different meaning. The imperial name was about military assembly, the moment the day's operational structure begins. The Voss name was about something older, the moment mystics record what they dreamed. Varric noted the distinction without assigning weight to it. He stepped off the transport ramp into cold highland air and immediately understood something the briefing had not communicated. Voss smelled different from any planet he had been assigned to. Not unpleasant, not remarkable in any specific way he could name, but different in the particular way that worlds with old things on them smell different, as if the ground had absorbed too much history to smell like ordinary rock. He noted this in the observation column. He did not try to conclude from it. The attaché's name was Brennan Coral. He had been on Voss for 2 years. He was 41 standard years old and looked 55. Not because 2 years on Voss had physically aged him, but because 2 years of adjusting expectations downward had settled into his face as a permanent expression of careful, managed disappointment. He shook Varric's hand with the grip of a man who had stopped expecting handshakes to mean anything. "Welcome to Voss," he said. "I'll tell you 3 things on the walk to the facility. After that, you'll have access to my full briefing file, which you should read and then probably read again, because the second reading is when the specific quality of the problem here becomes clear." Varric fell into step beside him. "First thing," Coral said, "the Voss won't discuss Sel-Makor directly. Not with us. Not with the Republic team. Not with anyone who isn't a mystic or cleared for mystic consultation. If you try to raise it in a diplomatic context, they listen politely and then redirect the conversation to trade road access or the Gormak perimeter situation. Every time. Without exception. The only pathway to Sel-Makor discussion is through mystic vision guidance, which means waiting for a mystic to bring it up, which means waiting for a mystic to receive a vision that includes it, which means operating on a timeline that has nothing to do with Imperial operational requirements. "Understood," Varric said. "Second thing. The Republic diplomatic team arrived 4 days ago. They brought a linguist who speaks fluent Voss. We don't have one. We've had a translation droid for 8 months. The Voss are polite to the droid. They are noticeably warmer to the linguist. 4 days in, the Republic team has had more substantive conversations with Voss cultural leadership than we've had in 8 months. I'm telling you this not to assign blame, but because it's relevant to your operational context." Varric noted it. "Third thing," Coral said. He paused fractionally before continuing. "The pause of someone deciding how to frame something they're not sure how to frame. One of the Voss Commandos stationed near the cave perimeter was relieved of duty 6 days ago. Behavioral irregularity. The Voss Commando command designated it an episode. They didn't elaborate. We asked for clarification. They said it was an internal matter. The soldier was rotated out of the perimeter assignment, and we haven't seen them since." Varric looked at him. "What kind of episode?" "The kind," Coral said carefully, "where a highly trained, experienced commando was found sitting at his post, unable to explain how long he had been sitting there. The kind where his watch log showed 6 hours of recorded entries that he had no memory of writing. The kind where his squad commander described his behavior afterward as..." Coral paused again, consulting memory. "Present in body, but oriented elsewhere." Silence. The highland path curved toward the facility's outer gate. The stone of Voss Car rose ahead of them. The amber and grey of Voss architecture, low and solid, and built for weather rather than impression. How long had he been stationed at that position? Varric asked. 9 days, Coral said. Varric opened his field log. Observation column. 3 items, Coral briefing. 1. Sel-Makor inaccessible through direct diplomatic channels. 2. Republic team holds relational advantage, 8 months compressed into 4 days via linguistic access. 3. Voss Commando, 9 days at cave perimeter. 6 hours of unaccounted consciousness, relieved of duty, designated episode. He looked at the conclusion column. He left it blank. He closed the log. Sorveth had received the authorization at the vision hour the previous evening. The elder mystic who delivered it, Gorith who saw the twin paths, her teacher, had done so with the specific economy of language the Voss mystic tradition used for formal permissions. 7 words in the old form. She had heard those 7 words granted to others before. She had never had them directed at her. They meant, you may enter. The responsibility is yours. She had gone home. She had slept. She had recorded the night's visions, minor, domestic, the kind of small-scale confirmatory sight that came on nights when the mind was processing rather than reaching. She had eaten the highland grain that Voss tradition held was appropriate before entering significant spaces. She had checked her recording's surface. She had checked it again. At first light, she had climbed to the stones. She had sat for 1 hour. She had gone down the switchback path. The cave entrance was larger from the bottom of the slope than it looked from the ridge. She stood in front of it for approximately 2 minutes. This was not hesitation. She was calibrating. There was a difference, and she held the difference carefully. Hesitation comes from fear of what is inside. Calibration comes from the need to establish a clean baseline before the conditions change. She needed to know what she felt before she entered, so that she could accurately measure what changed when she did. She felt cold air moving against her face from the cave interior, the specific smell of deep rock, mineral, neutral, very old. The low-frequency sound of the wind passing over the cave mouth from above, which produced a faint resonance at the outer edge of the entrance chamber. She noted all of this. She entered. The outer chamber of Sel-Makor was approximately 15 meters deep before the passage narrowed. It was not dark. The morning light came in through the entrance and reached the first 8 meters clearly. Beyond that, it dimmed progressively, not sharply. The walls were the same grey highland rock as everything above. The floor was uneven but navigable. There were no markings, no carvings, no indication that anyone had treated this space as significant. She moved to the midpoint of the outer chamber and stopped. She stood. 1 hour. That was the methodology. Stand in the space. Receive what comes. Do not reach for it. Do not interpret it while inside. Simply be present and allow the record to accumulate in whatever form it takes, and then exit, and then record. She stood for 1 hour. The cave was not silent. The resonance from the wind continued, low, cycling, slightly irregular in its intervals. Deeper in the passage she could hear, or believed she could hear, a secondary sound, lower than the wind resonance, less connected to the rhythm of the air above, more consistent. She noted it without leaning toward it. 30 minutes in, something happened. She could not describe it during the hour, because description was not the methodology. She held it without language and let the hour complete. When the hour was done, she walked out. The highland light had moved. 2 hours had passed. She stood at the cave entrance and looked at the position of the light on the rock face above and understood, without calculation, that she had been inside for 2 hours, not 1. The methodology had specified 1 hour. She had experienced 1 hour. The light disagreed. She walked up the switchback path. She sat among the stones. She opened her recording surface. She looked at the left column. What I saw. She held her stylus above the stone. Nothing came. Not because nothing had happened inside. Something had happened inside. She was certain of this in the way she was certain of her own name, certain of the weight of the recording surface in her hands, certain of the cold stone beneath her. Something had happened, but she could not locate the beginning of a coherent image to record. Every time she reached for the starting point, the first thing she had seen, the first impression, The moment she would write, I entered the chamber and observed. The image shifted slightly, moved to a different position, was replaced by a different image that also shifted when she reached for it. She tried the right column instead. What it means? Nothing. She tried the beginning again. Still nothing that held still long enough to write. She sat for a long time with the recording surface open and the stylus in her hand, and nothing in either column. What had happened inside was not absence. It was the opposite of absence, too much, too present, too immediate. Like walking into a room where everyone is speaking simultaneously in languages she almost understood. The content was there. The coherence was not. She made one entry. In neither column specifically. She wrote it in the center of the surface, between the two. I cannot locate the line between what I saw and what I expected to see. She looked at this for a long time. Then she wrote, in small notation beneath it, "This is new information. I do not yet know what kind." She closed the record. She looked at the cave entrance below. By the time Varric sat down in his assigned quarters that evening, he had completed his initial facility review, attended a brief operational meeting with Corell and 2 junior attachés, reviewed the accessible portions of the 8-month Voss diplomatic file, and walked under Voss Commando escort to within 400 meters of the Sel-Makor perimeter. He had not been authorized to go further on the first day. The cave entrance had been visible from that distance. He had looked at it for approximately 4 minutes. He had noted, visible from 400 meters, no distinguishing features from this range. Perimeter marked by Voss Commando positioning rather than physical barrier. So the wind from highland passes creates audible effect at cave mouth. Soldiers at perimeter wearing standard commando gear with no specialized equipment. He had not noted anything that felt wrong, anything that felt unusual, anything that his trained intelligence mind flagged as outside normal parameters. That, he thought later, in the quiet of his assigned quarters, was itself unusual. He had an instinct for wrongness. He had built a career on it. He had walked into buildings, facilities, meeting rooms, and immediately catalogued the ways the situation departed from what he had been told to expect. He had walked 400 meters from Sel-Makor and felt nothing. He did not know whether to record this as absence of threat or as presence of something that did not trigger the instinct. He opened his field log. He reviewed his entries from the day, the 3 items from Corell's briefing recorded in the morning, the facility review notes, the operational meeting summary, the perimeter observation, all in the left column, specific, clean, supportable. The right column, conclusion column, the column that represented what he made of what he saw, was almost entirely empty. This was not normal for him. In standard field conditions, his conclusion column was full by end of day. Shorter than the observation column, but substantive. Assessments, patterns, angles. Tonight the conclusion column had 3 entries, small ones, inconclusive ones. He looked at the blank space where his conclusions should have been. Outside the single window of his quarters, the Voss Highland had gone completely dark. Not the gradual dark of a settlement evening. The highland dark that arrives in full once the last light leaves the mountain rock. Comprehensive and immediate and very old. The light fixture above his desk was the only light in the room. His field log lay open on the table, both columns visible. He was not afraid. But he was. And he noted this precisely, as he noted everything. At the edge of a category of problem he did not yet have the vocabulary to accurately describe. Something was different here from anything he had preparation for. He did not close the log. He left it open on the table. He did not know why. He went to the narrow window and looked out at the Highland dark for a long time. From somewhere beyond the perimeter, too far to identify direction, too low to confirm as external rather than internal, there was a sound. Cycling. Patient. He noted it. He left the conclusion column blank. Memory is not a clean record. Varric knew this professionally. He had been trained to distrust it, his own and everyone else's. Memory compresses. Memory selects. Memory takes the raw observation and quietly, without permission, begins moving things into the conclusion column before the observer has authorized the transfer. He knew this. He still thought about Mira Sen every morning on Voss. Not dramatically. Not with the weight that word, thought about, implies in most contexts. More like the way a person becomes aware of a sound they've been hearing for a while, without registering it. She was simply there, in the background of his operational thinking, a presence in the record that he had not filed and could not unfiled. He noted this without assigning it meaning. He was getting worse at that. They had met in the 3rd year of his posting to the Imperial Intelligence Analysis Division on Dromund Kaas. She ran signals intelligence. He ran field observation correlation. The work of taking what field operatives sent back and finding the pattern underneath the raw data. Different disciplines, occasionally overlapping. The overlap was what introduced them. A joint case file, a set of intercepted communications that required both signals interpretation and field context analysis to make sense of. The first time they reviewed a document together, she found something in his notation that he had not seen himself. He had written in the observation column, "Source arrived at the meeting point 17 minutes early. Standard pre-meet behavior for a nervous asset." She had read it and underlined the second sentence. "This is in the wrong column," she said. He looked at it. "It's an observation. The first sentence is an observation. He arrived 17 minutes early. That's a fact. The second sentence is a conclusion. You've decided what the early arrival means. You've called it standard pre-meet behavior for a nervous asset. That's interpretation. It's sitting in the observation column, wearing the clothes of a fact." He had argued. He had said that the interpretation was supported by extensive field experience with asset behavior patterns, that it was not a conclusion so much as a trained recognition, that there was a meaningful difference between interpretation and applied expertise. She had listened to the argument completely. Then she said, "You're right that there's a difference. You're wrong that this particular sentence is on the right side of it." He had gone back to his quarters that evening and reviewed 6 months of field logs. She was right about 11 other instances. He had never told her this. She was not what Imperial intelligence training produced in most of its operatives. The training was designed for a specific outcome. People who were precise, controlled, effective, and emotionally managed to the point of functional inaccessibility. This was useful. Varric understood why it was useful. Sentiment was a liability in intelligence work. Attachment created vulnerability. A person who could be reached through their connections to other people was a person who could be compromised through those connections. Mira had gone through the same training. She had emerged from it precise and controlled and effective. She had not emerged inaccessible. He had never understood how she managed this. He had asked her once, in the indirect way they asked each other most significant questions, framed as professional inquiry, stripped of the personal implication that was actually the question. How do you keep the methodology clean without losing the... He had paused, looking for the right word. The permeability. She had looked at him for a moment. Permeability, she repeated. The capacity to receive information that doesn't fit existing categories. That's what you mean by permeability. Yes, she had thought about it. I think the training assumes those two things are in conflict, precision and permeability. It teaches you to choose precision, and precision is right. You need it. But I don't think they're actually opposed. I think permeability is what makes precision accurate rather than just consistent. You can be very precisely wrong. He had written this down that evening, in the conclusion column. It was one of only 3 entries in his personal log, not the official field log, that he had sourced to another person rather than to his own observation. He had noted MS, permeability as precondition for accuracy rather than threat to it. He had not shown her the entry. He had not shown anyone. The 3 years they worked in overlapping assignments were the most productive of his career. This was documented. His performance assessments from that period were among the highest he had received. His analysis accuracy rate, the metric Imperial intelligence used to measure how often a field operative's conclusions proved consistent with outcomes, was 4 points above his previous 3-year average. He had never told anyone why. The reason was simple and not something Imperial intelligence's performance framework had a category for. He was being read. Not his classified reports. Those went through proper channels, reviewed by supervisors who were looking for strategic value, not structural quality. His working logs, his draft analyses, the documents he showed Mira before they became official records. She read them the way she had read that first document, carefully, looking for the places where the columns had blurred, where he had moved an interpretation into the observation section and then forgotten he had moved it, so that the interpretation began to harden into a fact through repetition alone. She found these places consistently. He became, over 3 years, much better at finding them himself, but he never fully closed the gap that required her to find them, because the gap was structural. It was a property of how the mind works when it has been working on a problem long enough. The observation and the conclusion begin to feel the same. The border between them becomes difficult to maintain under sustained pressure. He needed someone outside his own cognition to mark the border. She was that person. And then the Voss assignment came. He had told her about it in the cafeteria on the 3rd sub-level of the Dromond Cars analysis building. They ate there most days, not together by any formal arrangement, simply by the coincidence of similar schedules and the same preference for the table in the far corner, which was away from the main traffic flow and had adequate ambient noise without being disruptive to conversation. He set his tray down across from her. He told her about the assignment the way he told her everything, in operational terms. Location, duration, primary objective, resource allocation. The standard summary he would have given any colleague who asked. She listened to the full summary. Then she said, "What's in the redacted section?" He looked at her. "You didn't mention it," she said, "which means it exists, and you've already decided it's not discussable, which means it's significant enough that you're managing the information rather than sharing it." "What's in it?" he said. "Threat assessment, fully redacted. I don't know why." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "They're sending you because they think you won't be affected." He waited. "You're not force sensitive. Whatever happened to the operatives before you? And something happened. That's what the redaction is. Whatever happened, it happened through the force. Through whatever the cave does to force sensitive minds. You're not force sensitive. They've decided this means you're protected, he said. That's a reasonable assessment. It's a partial assessment, she said. They're right that you won't be affected the way the Sith were. They're wrong that you won't be affected, he said. What do you mean? She picked up her utensil. She ate. She did not answer immediately. She had the specific quality of not answering immediately that he had come to understand was not avoidance, but precision. She was selecting the right words rather than the first words. Then she said, You record everything, every observation, every sensory detail, everything your environment communicates to you. That's not just training. That's how you process the world. Your entire cognitive structure runs through the field log, the observation column and the conclusion column. That's not a methodology you follow. That's how you think. He said nothing. If something interferes with the column structure, she said, it doesn't touch the force. It touches the way you organize reality. And that's more fundamental than force sensitivity, Varric. That's the architecture. That's the thing underneath everything else. He said, the briefing doesn't suggest any mechanism by which a dark side nexus would interact with non-force sensitive cognitive structure. No, she said, it wouldn't. She looked at him steadily across the table. He had not known what to say. He had said, I'll note your assessment. She had smiled, very slightly. The smile of a person who knows that I'll note your assessment means I heard you and I'm not ready to accept it yet. Note it in the right column, she said. That was the last real conversation they had. Not because of conflict, not because anything ended. The Voss assignment moved quickly through authorization, and he was on a transport within 6 days. The 6 days were full of preparation, equipment review, supplemental research, the administrative architecture of departure. He saw her twice in passing. The first time she handed him a note, a physical one, written on actual paper, which was unusual enough that he registered it. He opened it in his quarters. It said, The column is a tool, not a law. The cave will not know the difference. He had kept the note. It was in the inner pocket of his field jacket. He had not yet decided what column it belonged in. On the third morning of his posting, he was authorized to approach the Sel-Makor perimeter directly, not to enter, to observe from the authorized external position, approximately 40 meters from the cave entrance, closer than he had been on the first day. He went alone. Coral had offered an escort. He had declined. He walked the switchback path in the early Highland morning and stood at the authorized position and looked at the entrance to Sel-Makor. 40 meters was close enough to see detail. The rock around the entrance was unremarkable. The entrance itself was unremarkable, 2 meters high, roughly 1.5 wide, dark interior, the same grey stone. Nothing that communicated significance. Nothing that the eye wanted to stay on. The wind came down from the passes. It moved across the cave mouth. At 40 meters, he could hear the effect it produced. The low cycling resonance he had heard from his window the previous 2 nights. From this distance, it was clear it was external. Wind over rock, acoustic geometry. He stood and listened to it for a long time. He was not afraid. He was aware, with the clarity that came from being very close to something, rather than theorizing about it from a distance, that the sound was doing something to his attention. Not dramatically, not in a way he could point to and label, just a very subtle quality of redirection. Every time he tried to think clearly about what he was observing, the thought arrived at the sound before arriving at its destination. like a path that consistently curved back to the same point, regardless of which direction he started from. He stepped back. He opened his field log. He wrote, "Observation. The cave entrance appears identical from this distance to any other cave entrance. The acoustic effect produced by wind over the entrance geometry is consistent with standard cave resonance. No anomalous visual features, no anomalous physical properties detectable from this position." He stopped. He looked at the conclusion column. He held the stylus above it. He thought about the acoustic effect, about the way his thinking had curved back toward it, about the difference between a sound that was unusual and a sound that redirected attention in a consistent and non-random pattern, about whether that distinction was an observation or a conclusion. He thought about Mira, about what she had said across the cafeteria table. The cave will not know the difference. He wrote in the conclusion column, "This is an observation wearing the clothes of a conclusion." He looked at what he had written. He closed the log. He left it on the table when he returned to his quarters. He stood at the window for a long time. The highland was doing what it always did in the mid-morning, the light moving across the rock faces, the shadow lines shortening, the cold pulling back incrementally from the overnight position. Everything orderly, everything in its place. He was not afraid. He was at the edge of understanding something that his training had not prepared him to understand. He stood at the window. He did not reach for the log. The Voss mystic tradition was 3,000 years old. In 3,000 years, it had accumulated a great deal of certainty. Sorveth respected the certainty. She had grown up inside it, had been identified as a potential mystic at age 7, had entered formal training at 9, had spent 20 years absorbing the language and methodology and cosmology of a tradition that had guided her people through wars and Gormak incursions, and the arrival of outsiders who wanted things the Voss were not prepared to give. The tradition had held. The tradition had proven itself repeatedly. The tradition had a track record that most systems of knowledge would find difficult to match. She respected all of this. She also had, quietly and privately, and without telling anyone who mattered, she had a problem with one of its foundational assumptions. The tradition held that vision was binary. A vision was either true or corrupted, clear or interfered with, from the Force or from something that was not the Force. The entire mystic evaluation framework, the training cycles, the verification protocols, the elder review processes, was built on this binary. A mystic learned to distinguish true vision from false vision. That was the core competency. That was what 3,000 years of mystic tradition had refined into a precise and reliable discipline. Sorveth had believed this completely until her second year after the third dreaming. Then she had started keeping the 2-column records. Not because anyone told her to, not because the tradition required it, because she had noticed, in reviewing her own vision records against outcomes, a pattern that the binary framework did not account for. The visions were partially accurate. Not all of them. Many were fully accurate. Sight and meaning, both confirmed by outcome, clean and verifiable. And some were corrupted. She had experienced 3 in her career that she had identified in real time as interference rather than genuine sight, and the elder review process had confirmed all 3. But there was a third category, larger than she had expected. Visions where the sight was accurate and the interpretation was wrong, or where the interpretation was accurate and the sight was distorted, showing her the correct meaning through a lens that shifted the visual details, or where both sight and meaning were accurate but the timing was wrong, or where the vision was accurate about a situation that no longer existed when she acted on it. The binary had no entry for these. She had made one herself. She called it, in her private records, the partial column. It was not a formal designation. She had not submitted it to any elder for naming or recognition. It existed only in the second column of her personal vision records. The column she had added because the standard format, which recorded only the vision and its confirmed or denied outcome, could not hold the information she was actually gathering. The second column held the uncertainty. The vision shows X. The vision may mean Y. The vision may mean something I am not yet equipped to understand. 3 possibilities. Always 3. Because the tradition offered 2, true or false, and she had found a third. An honesty required her to hold all 3 simultaneously until the record either confirmed or eliminated them. Her teacher thought this was a problem. Goreth, who saw the twin paths, had been a mystic for 41 years. She was not unkind. She was not rigid in the way of someone who had never thought carefully. She was rigid in the more difficult way, the way of someone who had thought very carefully about a tradition and arrived at genuine conviction, not inherited assumption. Her certainty was earned. That made it harder to argue with. She had seen Sorveth's second column once, not by request. Sorveth had been reviewing records in a shared space, and Goreth had looked over at the recording surface and seen the format. She had asked about it. Sorveth had explained it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to explain things. Goreth had listened to the full explanation. Then she said, "A mystic who qualifies every vision is a mystic who does not trust the Force." Sorveth had not responded immediately. She was selecting the right words rather than the first words. She said, "I trust the Force. I'm less certain I always trust my interpretation of what the Force is showing me." Goreth looked at her for a moment. "Those are the same thing," she said. "The vision is the Force speaking. To qualify the vision is to question the speaker." Sorveth said, "The vision arrives through me. My cognition is the medium through which it passes. If the medium has properties, distortions, limitations, gaps, then the vision that arrives may carry those properties alongside what the Force intended. I'm not questioning the Force. I'm acknowledging that I am not a perfect instrument." Goreth said, "A mystic who believes she is an imperfect instrument will become one." She left the conversation there. Sorveth had written the exchange in her records that evening. In the observation column, Goreth's position, qualification equals distrust. A mystic who believes she is imperfect will become imperfect. Instrument quality is determined by the mystic's faith in her own sight. In the conclusion column, after a long pause, "My teacher may be right. My teacher may be demonstrating precisely why the qualification is necessary." She had looked at that conclusion for a long time. Then she had added a notation beneath it, smaller. "I cannot determine which of these is true from inside my own cognition." This is the problem the second column exists to address. It does not solve the problem. It holds it accurately. She had one other private record that she returned to regularly. It was not a vision record. It was a record of a conversation. The kind of thing the tradition did not formally require mystics to keep, but that she had kept since her earliest training years, because conversations seemed to her to carry information that vision records alone could not. The conversation was with a junior commando who had been assigned to the cave perimeter 6 months before the current posting. His name was Torath of the Second Standing, a young soldier, 23 years old, good record, no history of irregularity. He had approached her voluntarily. This was unusual. Commandos did not typically initiate contact with mystics outside of formally structured interactions. He had said, "I want to ask a mystic something." She had said, "Ask." He said, "When a vision is wrong, when a mystic sees something that turns out to be incorrect, what happens to the vision afterward? In the record? Does it get removed?" She said, "No, it stays in the record. It's marked as unconfirmed or contradicted by outcome, but it stays." He said, "So, a mystic who had a vision about the cave, about what's inside it, and then went inside and found something different from the vision, that vision would stay in the record, the wrong one and the right one both?" She said, "Yes, both stay." He had been quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good. Someone should know both happened." She had written this in her records that evening. She had not been able to place it in either column cleanly. She had written it between them. Just 3 months later, Torath of the Second Standing was the soldier relieved of duty for an episode involving 6 hours of unaccounted entries in his watch log. She had heard about this through standard commando communication channels. She had retrieved her record of their conversation. She had read it again. She had still not been able to place it in either column. This was the interior world Sorveth carried into her 4th entry into Sel-Makor's outer chamber. Not fear, not certainty. The weight of a question she had been holding for 3 years that was getting heavier rather than lighter. The question of what vision actually was, how it moved through a mystic's cognition, where the Force's signal ended and the mystic's mind began. She had no answer. She had a very detailed record of not having an answer. She went 4 meters deeper than the previous visit. She did this methodically. Each visit she extended her position by a measured distance. 3 meters, then 4 again. Not rushing the approach, not retreating from it. Building the record incrementally so that she would have, eventually, a complete account of how the cave felt at each distance, rather than a single account of how it felt from the deepest point. This was the methodology. At the extended position, she stood for the agreed hour. The cave was doing what it had done in previous visits. The low cycling sound, the quality of attention redirection that she had noticed and recorded and could not fully explain. At 4 meters deeper, it was marginally more present. Not louder, more present. The distinction mattered, and she held it carefully. 30 minutes in, she noticed something new. The vision she had recorded 2 nights ago, the patrol path, the 2 commandos at the Eastern Ridge Junction, was present in her mind with unusual clarity. Not as memory, as active image. The kind of clarity that a vision has while it is happening, not the kind that a memory has after. She looked at it carefully, without leaning toward it. It was accurate. She knew it was accurate because she had verified it. The commandos had taken that path. The patrol log had confirmed it. The vision had been correct. But here, inside the cave, at 4 meters deeper than before, the vision was presenting itself again. Not as a new vision, as a replay of the old one. And it was slightly different from the original. Small things, the quality of the light in the image, the position of one commando's equipment, just details that did not affect the accuracy of the core content, but that were not how she had originally recorded it. She noted this without interpreting it. She completed the hour. She walked out. The highland sky was moving from gold to grey. Vision hour. Dusk. The light leaving the mountain rock in the slow way it left at this latitude. Not sharp, not sudden, but a gradual withdrawal that took 40 minutes and left the highland in a quality of illumination that was neither day nor night. She sat among the stones. She opened her recording surface. She looked at the two columns. What I saw. What I think it means. She held the stylus above the stone. She wrote in the left column, what I saw. She wrote in the right column, what I thought I saw. She looked at both headings. She wrote beneath them, centered between the two, key in the careful, even hand she used for everything. I am no longer certain these are different entries. She did not write this in panic. Her hand was steady. The letters were the same size and spacing as every other entry she had made in 3 years of careful record keeping. She looked at what she had written. She looked at the cave entrance below. 200 meters of slope in the failing light. The dark mouth of Sel-Makor visible and still and unchanged. The cycling sound was not audible from here. From here, it was quiet. She looked at the sky above, grey deepening toward the first dark. The twin moons not yet visible but present, their light beginning to build behind the cloud cover at the eastern mountain edge. She did not feel afraid. She felt the specific quality of a person who has been standing on ground they believed was solid and has just become aware, very precisely and without drama, that the ground has properties they did not account for. She closed the record. She did not look back at the cave as she walked toward the path. The stones remained behind her, the tilted one at its slow angle, the cave below them, the sky darkening above everything. Something was giving way. Not suddenly, not dramatically, the way Highland stone gives way to weather. Slowly, comprehensively, and with the particular permanence of a change that cannot be reversed by returning to the conditions that preceded it. The vision hour completed itself. The dark arrived. The authorization came through on the 14th day of Verrick's posting. 1 page, Imperial Intelligence cipher, his handler's signature at the bottom. Not a warm signature, not a cold one, simply a signature. The way all authorizations from this particular handler arrived, as administrative fact rather than human communication. The authorization permitted entry into Sel-Makor's outer and mid-chambers, not the inner chamber. The inner chamber remained restricted by Voss Commando protocol, not Imperial directive. The distinction mattered legally. It did not change what the authorization actually permitted. He read it twice. He noted it in the observation column. He did not write in the conclusion column. He folded the authorization and put it in his field jacket beside Mira's note. The same morning, Sorveth received a vision, not during sleep. During her morning record review, the daily practice of sitting with the previous night's entries and reading them in the Highland light for qualities that darkness sometimes obscures. The vision arrived the way strong visions arrived, not gradually, not with warning, but as a complete image delivered all at once. It showed her a date, not a visual image of a date. The Voss tradition did not work in abstractions. It showed her the Highland in a specific quality of morning light, the twin moons still visible at the western edge of the sky, the stone circle casting shadows at a particular angle. She knew from the light and the moon position and the shadow angle that the vision was showing her today, this morning, now. It showed her the cave entrance. It showed her going inside. She wrote both columns before she stood up. What I saw, the date, the cave, the entry, what it means. Today is the right day to go deeper. She paused over the second column for a long time. Then she added, or today is the day the cave wants me to believe is right. She kept both entries. She went inside. Neither of them knew the other was there. Verrick entered at the ascendant hour when the Highland was still cold from the night, and the light had just begun to reach the lower slopes. He signed into the Voss Commando entry log at the perimeter. Protocol required it, and he followed protocol with the automatic precision of someone who had internalized it beyond the point of conscious decision. The commando at the log noted his entry time, his authorized depth, his expected exit window. Sorveth entered the cave 2 hours later through a secondary access route, a narrower passage on the cave's northern face that the mystic tradition used for observation entries, kept deliberately separate from the main entrance to avoid interfering with commando operations. The commando log did not record mystic entries. This was a standing arrangement, old enough that neither the commandos nor the mystics thought of it as a gap. It was simply how the system had always worked. The cave had 2 of them inside it now, in separate chambers, going deeper. What the cave looked like from inside the mid-chambers was not what Varric had built in his mind from the briefing materials. He had expected something the eye would react to, some visual property that communicated significance, unusual rock formations, temperature anomaly, visible evidence of the force activity that classified documents described in carefully managed technical language. He had expected his intelligence training to engage immediately, cataloging and categorizing, the observation column filling with clean, specific data. The mid-chambers were dark. That was the first property, not the absolute dark of a sealed room. His handheld light source reached the walls and the ceiling and showed him ordinary highland rock, unremarkable geology, the same grey stone as the outside. But the quality of the dark beyond his light was different from external dark. Denser, more present. Like the dark was a substance rather than an absence. He noted this and immediately questioned the notation. Is this an observation or a metaphor? He crossed out like the dark was a substance and wrote, visual field beyond handheld light source shows no reflected ambient light. Complete light absorption beyond approximately 4 meters. He kept walking. The sound was different inside. Outside, at 40 meters, at the authorized perimeter, the cycling resonance was clearly acoustic. Wind over rock. Explainable. He had categorized it as such, and the categorization had held. Inside the mid-chambers, the sound had no clear source. It was present in every direction simultaneously, not louder than outside, if anything, slightly quieter, but sourceless, omnidirectional in a way that his spatial processing kept trying to resolve and kept failing to resolve. He would turn toward what seemed like the direction of origin, and it would be equally present behind him. He would stand still, and it would seem to shift slightly, not in location, but in frequency. A very small shift, regular, like breathing. He wrote, acoustic anomaly, omnidirectional, frequency shift at regular interval approximately. He looked at his chronometer. He wrote the interval. He kept walking. At some point he stopped writing. He did not register stopping. He was writing, and then he was not writing, and the field log was in his hand, and the stylus was in his hand, and he was deeper in the mid-chambers than his authorization technically specified, and the light from the entrance was not visible behind him. He was not afraid. He was, and this was the last clear notation he would remember making, entirely present, more present than he had been in years. The quality of attention he brought to his most demanding analytical work multiplied. Every sensory channel fully engaged. The observation column of his mind running at maximum capacity, taking in everything, the rock texture, the temperature, the sound, the quality of the dark, the way his own breathing sounded in the enclosed space. The conclusion column was silent, not empty, silent, as if it was receiving information but had stopped processing it into language. He kept going. He became aware he was sitting. He was at the cave entrance, the outer entrance, the main one, the opening he had come in through. He was sitting on the ground outside it. His back was against the rock face beside the cave mouth. His field log was open in his lap. His handheld light was off and clipped to his jacket. The Highland sun was at a position that told him it was mid-afternoon. He had entered at the ascendant hour. He looked at the sun's position for a long time. He looked down at the field log. The entries were in his handwriting. That was the first thing he confirmed. Not because he doubted it, but because he had been trained to confirm the obvious before proceeding to the less obvious. The handwriting was his. The format was his. The two-column structure. The specific way he abbreviated certain recurring terms. The notation style that Imperial intelligence had trained into him, and that he had then personalized over 8 years of fieldwork. The entries covered approximately 4 hours. He read them. He read them again. The observation column contained detailed sensory notation, temperature readings, acoustic measurements, depth estimates, rock formation descriptions, specific, precise, the kind of data that required continuous active attention to gather, the kind of data he gathered well. The conclusion column contained the same information, not different conclusions drawn from the observations, the same information, identical in some places, slightly paraphrased in others, repeated in the conclusion column as if it were analysis, and in 3 places the columns had exchanged content entirely. A conclusion, a clear interpretive statement about what a sensory observation might indicate, was sitting in the observation column, marked as fact, recorded with the same flat certainty he used for things he had directly perceived. An observation, a specific physical measurement, was sitting in the conclusion column, as if it were a judgment he had arrived at rather than a thing he had seen. He read these 3 places carefully. He could not reconstruct which column the content had originated in. He could not determine whether he had written the conclusion first and moved it, or written it in the wrong place from the beginning. He could not determine whether he had known, at the time of writing, that the columns were crossed. He sat at the cave entrance and read his own record and could not find himself inside it. Sorveth came out 2 hours after Varric had found his position at the entrance. She did not see him. The secondary access route emerged on the northern face of the cave formation, 60 meters from the main entrance. She came out into the late afternoon light and climbed immediately. The mystic protocol, after a significant cave entry, was to return to the stones before beginning any record work, distance from the entrance before recording. This was not arbitrary. The elder records were clear that proximity to the cave while recording created interference in the record itself. She climbed the switchback path. She sat among the stones. She opened her recording surface. The vision had been the longest she had ever received, not the most powerful. She had received one vision during her second dreaming that had been more overwhelming in its physical impact, more total in its immersion. But this was the most detailed, the most specific, the kind of specificity that vision did not normally carry. Names, dates, sequences of events, and precise physical descriptions of what specific people had done in specific locations over specific periods of time. She began to transcribe. The vision showed her 3 individuals, human, male, dressed in the black and grey of Sith rank dress. She recognized the aesthetic from the outsider diplomatic personnel she had observed in Voss Commando, senior Sith. The vision did not give her their names directly. Vision rarely worked in language, but it gave her their rank insignia. their physical characteristics, the specific years of their entries into the cave, and what they had been like before they went in and what they had been like after. She transcribed this carefully. Before, 3 individuals with the specific quality of controlled power that she had noticed in all the Sith she had observed. The compressed self-certainty of people who have been told since early training that the Force serves them and have believed it long enough to stop questioning it. After, different, not broken. The vision was specific about this, and she recorded it carefully. Not destroyed or diminished. Different. Reorganized in some fundamental way that she could observe but could not name. Like a building that has had its interior walls moved. The exterior is intact, the structure holds, but the rooms are not where they were. She transcribed all of this. Then she sat with the record and looked at what she had written. The vision had shown her the past, not prophecy, not prediction, record. This was not how Voss mystic vision was supposed to work. The tradition was explicit. Vision is forward-facing. The Force shows mystics what is coming, not what has passed. What has passed is available through memory and documentation. The Force does not use vision to show mystics things that already exist in the record, unless the record had been hidden, unless the vision was showing her something that was true and was not available anywhere else, or unless the cave had constructed the vision from what it had absorbed from the 3 Sith who had entered it, and was showing her not truth but impression, not what had happened but what the cave believed had happened, filtered through whatever process the cave used to hold and replay experience. She sat with both possibilities. She could not eliminate either. She wrote in the space between her columns, "The vision may be true. The vision may be what the cave wanted me to see. I cannot determine which from inside my own cognition. I am recording both as open possibilities and will add no further interpretation until I have held this record for at least 3 days without returning to the cave." She looked at this notation. She added, "This is not a conclusion. This is a record of my uncertainty. The record is accurate. The uncertainty is real." She closed the recording surface. Below the stone circle, 60 meters away on the main face of the cave formation, Varric was still sitting at the entrance. He had not moved in 2 hours. He was not writing. The field log was still open in his lap, the crossed columns visible. The 4 hours of entries he could not fully claim sitting in his own handwriting. He had stopped trying to reconstruct the sequence. He had stopped trying to identify which column each entry had originated in. The exercise was producing conclusions he could not support, and he had enough training to stop doing things that produced unsupported conclusions. He was simply sitting. The Highland was moving into the vision hour. The Voss designation that he had learned from Coral's briefing and that he had privately found more accurate than the imperial equivalent. The light was doing what Voss light did at this hour, going from gold to grey, the mountains holding the last of the day in their upper elevations, while the lower slopes released it. He looked at the open field log. He did not close it. He did not write in it. He looked at the sky. Above him, among the stones, Sorveth was looking at the same sky. Vision hour. The grey settling in from the east. The twin moons building their light behind the cloud cover. The stone circle around her. The tilted stone at its angle. The cave entrance below and between them. Between her position and his, 60 meters and a rock face apart. Neither of them visible to the other. Both of them in the same highland silence. Both of them holding records they could not fully read. Both of them at the edge of something that had no clean entry in either column. The cycling sound was not audible from either position. That was the thing neither of them had expected. After everything the cave had done, the 4 missing hours, the crossed columns, the vision of classified records that may or may not have been true, after all of it, what the silence felt like was not relief. It felt like the sound had moved, not stopped, moved, inside. The chapter does not move from here, it simply ends. The way some things end, by stopping. 3 days after Varric came out of the mid-chambers, he filed a request. 1 page, standard imperial diplomatic format. Addressed to the Voss Cultural Liaison Office, the correct channel for all formal requests involving restricted Voss sites. The request asked for authorized access to Sel-Makor's inner chamber. It cited operational necessity. It cited the terms of the Imperial Diplomatic Framework Agreement, which included a clause about good faith consideration of intelligence-gathering requests. It was written in the careful, neutral language of someone who knew the request would be read by people who would look for any tone that could be used as grounds for denial. He filed it at the command meridian hour. By the twilight reckoning, the response had come back. 1 page, Voss Cultural Liaison format, 7 lines. The Voss did not use many words when few would serve, and few served here. The inner chamber was not open to outsiders. The inner chamber had never been open to outsiders. The inner chamber's restricted status was not subject to diplomatic framework negotiation, because the framework agreement, properly read, applied to the outer and mid-chambers only. The request was denied. The denial was final. Varric read the response twice. He filed it in his document archive. He noted it in the observation column. Request denied. Formal. Final. No appeal pathway indicated. The conclusion column. Someone does not want this on record as a negotiation. He closed the log. The denial is on record. Both the request and the response exist in the Imperial Diplomatic Archive for the Voss posting. They were reviewed during a standard file audit conducted 11 years after the events described here. The auditor noted them as routine. A request, a denial, standard diplomatic friction. The auditor moved on. What the auditor did not have access to, what no Imperial auditor has ever had access to, is the Voss Commando log for the Sel-Makor perimeter covering the same period. That log was partially declassified during an archival review that the Voss permitted 63 years after these events. The Voss did not explain why they permitted the review at that specific time. They did not explain why they permitted it at all. The archival team that received access, a mixed group of Republic historians and 1 Voss mystic archivist who acted as liaison, was given 3 days with the physical records and no ability to make copies. Everything they preserved was transcribed by hand. What the Commando log shows for the period 3 days following Varric's authorized entry is this: 5 entry marks, 3 exit marks. The log is a flat Voss recording stone, approximately 30 centimeters by 20, dark grey, smooth on the recording face. The marks are made in the standard Voss Commando notation, simple vertical lines for entry, horizontal lines crossing them for exit. The system is old. It predates the outsider presence on Voss by centuries. It was designed for tracking commando patrol movements, not for tracking the movements of outsiders into restricted sites. It was adapted for this purpose when the outsiders arrived, and the cave perimeter became a formal assignment. The adaptation was simple: entry marks made in one section of the stone, due exit marks confirmed by the same commando who logged the entry. The marks crossed when the individual came back out. Standard accountability, standard protocol, the kind of system that works reliably for decades, because it is too simple to fail. 5 entry marks were made. 3 of them were crossed. 2 were not. The Voss Commandos conducted a formal inspection of the inner chamber 1 week after the entry marks were logged. The inspection report is also in the partially declassified archive. It is short. The chamber appeared undisturbed. No evidence of physical harm to any persons. No evidence of conflict. No marks on the walls. No damage to the floor surface. No material evidence of any kind that anything other than the ordinary process of time had occurred in the space. The chamber was empty. It appeared as it always had. The 2 individuals who had not exited were not found. Not in the inner chamber. Not in the mid-chambers. Not in the outer chamber. Not in the cave system at any accessible point. The inspection report notes this factually, in the flat, administrative language of a document that is recording what is present and what is absent. It does not speculate about what the absence means. It does not propose explanations. It records the condition of the space and the confirmed absence of the 2 individuals, and then it ends. Neither Imperial nor Republic records include these 2 individuals. This is the specific fact that the Republic historians who accessed the archive in that 3-day window found most difficult to process, not the disappearance itself, but the administrative silence around it. Disappearances in restricted sites generate paperwork. They generate incident reports, missing persons filings, diplomatic notifications, intelligence flags. The machinery of both the Empire and the Republic, whatever their differences, shares this property. It documents its losses. There is no documentation, not a suppressed document. The historians looked for suppression markers, the administrative traces that indicate a file existed and was removed. There are none. The absence is not a gap in the record. It is as if the record was never asked to account for these 2 people at all. The commando log identifies them by species designation only. 2 humans. Nothing further. No gender recorded. No affiliation recorded. No names. Whether they arrived at the cave entrance together or separately, the log does not say. Whether they were accompanied by others who did not enter, the log does not say. Whether the commandos on duty spoke to them before logging their entries. Whether there was any exchange at all between the soldiers keeping the log and the 2 people whose entries they marked. The log does not say. Whether they went in willingly is not recorded. Whether they were sent is not recorded. Whether they knew what they were walking into is not recorded. What happened next was never recorded by either side. The Voss mystic tradition holds that certain encounters are between the individual and the Force. Not everything that happens inside a sacred space belongs to the record of those outside it. Not every experience that a person carries into a significant site is something that the surrounding world has a right to account for. The mystic teaching on this is old. Older than the cave perimeter. Older than the formal restricted status of the inner chamber. Older than the commando log system that adapted itself to track outsider movements. The teaching says, some things close behind the person who enters them, not because they are secret, because they are complete, because the language of record was not built to hold them, and any attempt to hold them in that language does damage to what they actually were. This may explain why the Voss Commandos who logged 5 entries and 3 exits logged nothing further. It may not explain it. Both possibilities exist. The account does not choose between them. Varric learned about the entry log 7 days after his request was denied. Not from the log itself. He never saw the log. He learned about it from Coral, who had learned about it from a junior attaché, who had a source inside the Voss Commando administrative structure. The information arrived in fragments, the way most useful information arrives. Not as a complete account, but as 3 partial ones that required assembly. He assembled them. He wrote in his observation column 5 entries logged at inner chamber perimeter during restricted period, 3 exits confirmed, 2 individuals unaccounted for. Neither Imperial nor Republic records reflect missing persons. Cave inspection 1 week later. Chamber empty, undisturbed. He looked at the conclusion column for a long time. He wrote, "I do not have enough information to conclude anything." He looked at this. He wrote beneath it, smaller, "I have enough information to know I should not be here." He did not file a departure request. He did not know why. Sorveth learned about it differently. She did not learn about the entry log. She did not learn about the missing individuals through any channel of communication. She learned about it the way mystics sometimes learn about things, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the 3 minutes after a night vision fades and before the mind re-establishes its ordinary categories. She woke on the morning of the 4th day after her entry into the outer chamber with a specific image in her mind. 2 people, walking into dark, not afraid. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the dark, not the direction, not the cave that she recognized in the image without needing to confirm it. The part that stayed was the quality of their movement, unhurried, deliberate. The movement of people going somewhere they have decided to go, fully. She did not know if this was a vision or a memory of something she had seen and catalogued without conscious awareness. She wrote it down, in the space between the columns. She did not write what it meant. She did not know. The commando log was stored in the Voss Commando archive after the perimeter assignment concluded. It is still there. The archival team that accessed it 63 years after these events transcribed the marks by hand. 5 verticals in the entry section, 3 horizontals crossing 3 of them. The transcription is accurate. The Republic historians confirmed it against the original stone twice before their access period ended. The stone is dark grey, smooth on the recording face, 30 centimeters by 20. The 2 uncrossed marks are in the same condition as the 3 that were crossed. The stone does not distinguish between them. The marks do not explain themselves. They are simply marks made by a soldier doing a job on a day that the record holds and the record cannot illuminate, in a system designed to account for everyone who went in and everyone who came back out. 5 went in, 3 came back. The stone holds both numbers with equal weight. It was not built to prefer one over the other. The transmission arrived at the dark vigil hour. That was the Imperial designation. The deep night cycle, when Sith were supposed to be in meditation, and soldiers were supposed to be in rotating rest, and the administrative machinery of the Empire was supposed to be quiet. In practice, the dark vigil hour was when Imperial intelligence sent its most sensitive communications. The logic was simple. Fewer people awake. Fewer people who might notice a cipher transmission being received and decoded in a posting facility on a neutral world. Varric was awake. He had been awake for most of the dark vigil hours since arriving on Voss, not because he had trained himself to it, just because the Highland quiet at that hour had a quality that made sleep feel like a wrong answer to a question the darkness was asking. He decoded the transmission at his desk. It was 4 pages. His handler's voice, not literal voice, but the specific cadence of a person who had been writing operational communications for 20 years and whose sentence structure had become as identifying as a signature. Varric had read enough of these transmissions to hear the person behind the language. He heard something different in this one. He read it once quickly, He read it again, slowly. He put it down. The first page was administrative. Mission timeline extension. 2 additional weeks authorized. Supply replenishment scheduled. Personnel review deferred pending mission completion. Standard language. The kind of page that exists to establish that what follows is within sanctioned parameters. The second page was the update. It said, in the careful, neutral prose of Imperial intelligence formal communication, the primary intelligence objective of the Voss posting had been reassessed at the division level. Sel-Makor site intelligence remained a secondary objective and should continue to be pursued within authorized parameters. The primary objective, effective immediately, was assessment of Voss mystic predictive capabilities. Specifically, the degree to which mystic vision accuracy could be externally influenced, redirected, or compromised through environmental factors, including but not limited to prolonged proximity to dark side nexus environments. It said, the strategic value of Voss to the Empire is not the cave. The cave is a mechanism. The strategic value is the mystics. It said, Varric's non-force sensitive status made him uniquely positioned to conduct this assessment without the observational distortions that affected force-sensitive personnel in proximity to Sel-Makor. It said, begin immediately. The third page was methodology guidance. The fourth page was a reminder about sci-fi discipline. He sat with the 4 pages for a long time. Then he opened his field log. He wrote in the observation column, secondary briefing received. Dark vigil hour, day 19 of posting. Mission parameters updated at division level. Primary objective reassigned from Sel-Makor site intelligence to assessment of Voss mystic predictive accuracy and susceptibility to external influence. Sel-Makor intelligence now designated secondary objective. Effective immediately. He stopped. He read what he had written. He wrote, the primary mission was always the secondary mission. He looked at the conclusion column. It was blank. He held the stylus above it for a long time. Nothing came. Not because he lacked conclusions. He had conclusions. They were moving through his mind in the clear, sequential way that his analytical training produced under pressure. He had conclusions about what the mission update meant, about what it revealed about the 8 months of imperial diplomatic friction that had preceded his arrival, about what it said about the redacted threat assessment on page 17 of his original briefing, about what it meant that his handler had waited 19 days before telling him what the mission actually was. He had all of these conclusions. He could not write any of them, because writing them in the conclusion column meant accepting that he was inside a record he had not been allowed to read. And once he accepted that, once the conclusion column held it in his own handwriting, he could not unwrite it. He understood, sitting at his desk in the dark vigil hour, with the Highland quiet pressing against the window, that this was new. He had been used as a tool before. This was not a new experience in intelligence work. Operatives were positioned, aimed, deployed. The language of the profession was mechanical for a reason. He had been positioned and aimed and deployed many times. He had understood this and accepted it as the operational reality of the work. What was new was that he could not locate himself in the mechanism. He knew what the mission was now. He knew what he was being asked to do. He could execute it. The methodology was within his competency. The target population, the Voss mystics and their vision records, was accessible to him in ways that his non-force sensitive status made uniquely possible. He could do this. He could not find the place inside the mission where he stood. He closed the log without writing in the conclusion column. He left it open on the desk. He went to the window. On the other side of Voss Car, in the elder consultation chamber of the Mystic Administrative Complex, Sorveth was standing in front of 3 people who had guided her entire life and asking them a question she already suspected the answer to. The formal audience had taken 4 days to arrange. She had submitted the request through the correct channels, in the correct format, with the correct notation of purpose. I have observation records relevant to the Voss Sel-Makor oversight framework, and I am requesting elder review. This was the language that opened formal audiences. She had used it precisely because it was correct, and because she did not want the request denied on procedural grounds before it was considered on substantive ones. The 3 elder mystics who received her were Gorath, who saw the twin paths, her teacher, and 2 others she knew less well. Vel, who carries the first stone, the eldest of the 3, a woman of such advanced age that Sorveth had never known her to stand for an audience. She was seated. She had been seated for all formal proceedings for the past 11 years, and Amundrath of the Long Sight, the youngest of the 3 elders, Var, who had been elevated to the council 12 years ago, and who Sorveth had always found to be the most careful thinker in any room she shared with him. She laid her observation records on the review surface, all of them, 3 months of entries, organized in chronological sequence, the 2-column format consistent throughout, every vision she had received during the observation period, every entry from her cave sessions, including the ones where the columns had blurred, including the one where she had written, "I am no longer certain these are different entries," including the extensive vision from her deep chamber session that she had qualified as potentially true or potentially constructed by the cave. She let the elders review the records in silence. It took a long time. Vel, who carries the first stone, read slowly. Gorath read with the specific quality of attention she brought to Sorveth's records, looking for the places where the methodology was sound and the places where it was not. Amundrath read once quickly and then returned to specific sections. When they were done, Sorveth asked her question. Has the Voss decision to allow outsiders into Sel-Makor's outer chambers been guided by genuine mystic vision? She paused. Or has it been guided by the political calculation that outsider access is safer than outsider ignorance? The chamber was quiet. The 3 elders did not look at each other. This was notable. In Sorveth's experience of formal audiences, elder mystics consulted each other with their eyes before speaking on significant questions. The absence of the exchange meant one of 2 things. Either the question was too small to require consultation, or the answer was already agreed upon and did not need it. Vel, who carries the first stone, spoke first. She said, "Both." 1 word. The Voss elder tradition did not add language to answers that were complete. Sorveth waited. The eldest continued. A vision told us this. We did not see a way to separate them. Sorveth said, the vision told you that outsider access and political calculation were the same decision. The vision showed us an outcome, Vel said. The outcome required the outsiders to be inside the outer chambers. The calculation that outsider access prevented outsider force was also true. We could not determine from the vision which of these was the cause and which was the consequence. We made the decision. We recorded the vision that guided it. We did not record our uncertainty about the relationship between the two. Sorveth looked at her. Gorath said quietly, the records show a clear vision and a clear decision. This is accurate. The uncertainty is not in the records, because we assessed that the uncertainty was ours to carry and not the records to hold. Sorveth said, I would argue the opposite. Nobody in the room disagreed with her. Nobody in the room agreed with her either. Amundrath said, "Your observation records will be archived. The 2-column format will be preserved as submitted. The qualification notations will not be removed." He looked at her steadily. "This is not endorsement of the methodology. It is recognition that the records are yours and the methodology is yours, and both have been conducted honestly." Sorveth inclined her head. She gathered her records. She left the consultation chamber. She wrote the exchange in her record that night. She wrote carefully, the way she wrote everything, selecting the accurate words rather than the first ones, holding the stylus above the stone until the sentence was complete in her mind before committing it to the surface. Observation column, elder audience, formal. Velhu carries the first stone. The decision to allow outsider access was guided by genuine vision and by political calculation simultaneously. The vision did not separate them. The elders did not record their uncertainty about the relationship between the two, because they assessed the uncertainty was theirs to carry, not the records to hold. She looked at the conclusion column. She thought about what Vel had said. We did not see a way to separate them. She thought about Verrick's transmission, which she did not know existed, which she had no access to, which was sitting on a desk on the other side of Voss Car, in a building she had never entered, in a field log she had never seen. She thought about 2 columns that had started in the same place and reached the same destination through entirely different terrain. She wrote nothing in the conclusion column. She left it blank. She looked at the blank space for a long time. Then she wrote, very small, at the bottom of the column, below where a conclusion would go if she had one. The record was not kept honestly. This does not mean the decision was wrong. I cannot determine from inside my own cognition whether these are separable. She looked at this. It was not a conclusion. It was a record of arriving at the edge of where her methodology could take her, and finding the edge sooner than she had expected. She closed the record. The night settled over Voss Car. In a posting facility on the diplomatic quarters' western edge, Verrick sat at his desk. His field log was open in front of him. The single light fixture above the desk illuminated both columns. The observation column with its careful entries, the conclusion column with its blank space where tonight's conclusions would have gone if he had been able to write them. The window showed him Highland dark, complete and old and indifferent. In the mystic administrative complex on the eastern side of Voss Car, Sorveth sat at her recording surface. Her vision record was open. The low light of her quarters, a Voss fixture, warm and dim, designed for the vision hour and maintained at that level through the night, illuminated both columns. The observation column with the elder audience record, the conclusion column with its small notation at the bottom. The window showed her the same Highland dark. Neither of them knew the other was awake. Neither of them knew the other's record was open. Neither of them knew that both conclusion columns had arrived at the same condition. Blank above the line, and below it, something that was not a conclusion, but was the most honest thing either of them had written in weeks. The cave was too far from either building for the cycling sound to reach, and yet, very distantly, just in the specific quality of silence that Voss Car held at the dark vigil hour, when the settlement's ordinary sounds had stopped and the Highland took over, there was something at the lower edge of perception, not loud enough to identify, not close enough to locate. Low, cycling, patient in the way that things are patient when they are not measuring time the same way the people hearing them are measuring time. Both of them heard it. Neither of them wrote it down. There is a specific kind of mourning that comes after a decision has been made, but before it has been acted on. It looks identical to every other mourning. The light arrives the same way. The cold sits in the same places. The ordinary sounds of a settlement waking, footsteps, distant equipment, the specific acoustics of buildings that have been inhabited long enough to have their own rhythms. All of it arrives exactly as it always has. But the person inside it is different, not visibly, not in any way that another person would notice without being told. The difference is interior, the specific quality of a mind that has finished a calculation and is now simply waiting for the physical world to catch up with the conclusion it reached in the dark vigil hours when sleep was not possible, and the Highland quiet was asking its unanswerable questions. Varric had been awake since the 2nd hour of the dark vigil. He had made his decision at the 3rd. He had not acted on it yet. He was waiting for the ascendant hour, the correct time to file operational communications. With the patience of someone who has learned that acting at the wrong hour costs more than waiting for the right one. He sat at his desk. He did not open the field log. The field log was the problem, not as an object, as a record, as the account of 23 days on Voss, that he would eventually be required to submit, that his handler would read, that the division would assess, that would become the official Imperial intelligence record of what one non-force sensitive operative had found when sent to observe a dark side nexus on a neutral world. He had reviewed it the previous night, all of it. From the first entry, the pre-mission inventory on the transport, cold recycled air, the redacted block on page 17, to the most recent, which was the dark vigil transmission and the blank conclusion column that followed it. The review had taken 3 hours. What he had at the end of it was this: a partial account, accurate in every entry he could verify, incomplete in the sections where the deeper chambers had done what they had done to his notation, mixed in the 3 places where the columns had exchanged content, and blank, consistently, repeatedly blank, in the conclusion column at every moment that mattered most. It was not the field log his training had prepared him to produce. It was also the most honest field log he had ever kept. He had 2 options. He had written them out, not in the field log, in a separate sheet of plain paper, that he would destroy afterward because it was thinking work, not record work. 2 columns on the paper, not observation and conclusion. Simply, left side, right side, 2 directions. Left, file the partial report, request extraction. Return to Dromond Cast with an account that was accurate and incomplete, and would be assessed by his handler as insufficient for the mission's updated objectives. Accept whatever professional consequence followed. Accept that the mission was what it was, and that his record of it was what it was, and that the gap between those 2 things was not something he could close without compromising the record's honesty. Right. Request a 2nd entry into the deeper chambers. Go back in. Try to recover the 4 unaccounted hours. Try to reconstruct what the columns were trying to say in the places where they had crossed. Produce the complete report that the mission's updated objectives required. Accept what the 2nd entry might cost. He looked at the right side for a long time. He thought about the commando log. 5 entry marks, 3 exit marks, 2 humans. No record of who sent them or whether they chose to go. He thought about Mira's note in his inner pocket. The column is a tool, not a law. The cave will not know the difference. He understood now what she had meant. The column was a tool, and like any tool, it could be used correctly, or it could be used to justify something that the tool's existence alone did not justify. He could go back into the deeper chambers and call it completing the record. He could frame it as professional obligation, as mission integrity, as the operative's duty to produce a complete account. The cave would not know the difference between that framing and the truth. He would. He picked up the left side of the paper. The extraction request was 1 page. Standard format. Operational closure notification. Mission completion status. Return timeline request. He wrote it in the flat, neutral language of a document that was not asking for permission, but was following the protocol that required notification. He filed it at the ascendant hour. The acknowledgement came back within the hour. His handler's office confirming the extraction timeline, noting that the mission report would be expected within 10 days of return to Dromund Kaas, attaching a reminder about cipher discipline during the transit period. No response to the report's partial status. No question about the updated objectives and whether they had been met. The acknowledgement treated the extraction request as routine. He noted this in the observation column. In the conclusion column, he wrote, "Either the partial report is sufficient, and I was not told this, or it is not sufficient, and I am not being told this yet." He looked at both possibilities. He left them both in the column. He did not try to choose between them. He began packing his equipment. Chisoveth had received the vision 4 days before Varric filed his extraction request. She had not gone back to the cave since her 4th entry. The session that had produced the entry, I am no longer certain these are different entries. She had been reviewing records, attending to the ordinary work of a mystic's responsibilities. The smaller visions, the patrol confirmations, the daily practice of sitting with whatever the night had brought and recording it carefully in both columns. The vision arrived on the morning of the 24th day of the posting period. It arrived at first light, which was when strong visions came. In the transition between sleep and full waking, when the mind had not yet reassembled its ordinary defenses against information that did not fit existing categories. It showed her the inner chamber, not the outer chamber, not the mid-chambers. The inner chamber, the deepest reachable section of Sel-Makor, the restricted space, the place the Voss had never opened to outsiders, and that she had never entered, and that she had no authorized access to. It showed her inside it, walking towards something she could not see clearly. The vision had the specific quality of a destination that is known without being visible. She was walking toward it with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who knows where they are going. She wrote both columns before she was fully awake. Then she read what she had written, and she began the analysis that her 3 years of methodology had been building toward. The vision had the structural properties of a genuine vision in 3 specific ways. First, the quality of arrival. Corrupted visions, the 3 she had identified and the Elder Review had confirmed, arrived with a quality of pressure that she had learned to recognize, like something being pushed toward her rather than something opening. This vision had arrived the other way, the opening quality, the genuine marker. Second, the visual coherence. Corrupted visions had a specific kind of internal inconsistency, details that changed between one moment and the next, a quality of instability in the image that her trained attention could detect if she looked for it. This vision had been stable. Every detail she had recorded was consistent with every other detail. The inner chamber's dimensions, the quality of the dark, the sound, all of it coherent and internally consistent. Third, the emotional residue. Genuine visions left a specific quality of aftermath in her body. Not emotional in the way ordinary feeling was emotional, but a kind of cellular certainty, a physical knowledge that the mind had not yet translated into language. She felt it now, clear and distinct. 3 genuine markers. She wrote all of this in the observation column. Then she wrote in the conclusion column what the 3 genuine markers were not sufficient to establish. They were not sufficient because Sel-Makor existed, because she had documented over 24 days of careful observation that the cave produced experiences that occupied exactly the space between genuine vision and constructed impression, that it worked in precisely the register where her methodology's genuine markers lived, that whatever the cave was, whatever mechanism it used to affect the minds of those who entered and those who observed from proximity, it operated at the level of the markers themselves. It could produce the opening quality of arrival. She had documented this in her session notes. It could produce visual coherence and cellular certainty. She had documented this too. The 3 genuine markers were her most reliable tools. The cave had demonstrated that it could replicate them. This was the situation her methodology had been built to navigate. She had spent 3 years constructing a system precise enough to hold this exact problem. She applied the system now, carefully, completely, following every step. The system returned an answer. I cannot determine this conclusively. She sat with this answer for a long time. She made a decision. She would go to the outer chamber entrance, not inside, not into the outer chamber itself, to the threshold, the point where the cave began. She would stand there. She would wait for a second vision, a confirming signal, something independent of the first vision that would give her a second data point. 2 data points were not certainty, but 2 data points were more than 1, and 1 was not enough. She would not go further without the second vision. She would not go into the inner chamber on the authority of a vision she could not verify. This was the compromise. It was a negotiation between the mystic she had been trained to be, who followed visions, who trusted the opening quality of arrival and the cellular certainty as reliable markers, who would have walked into the inner chamber at first light without this doubt, and the mystic she had become on Voss, the one who kept 2 columns, the one who wrote, I cannot determine this conclusively, and held it as an honest answer rather than a failure of faith. She climbed down the switchback path. She stood at the threshold. She waited for 2 hours. The cycling sound was present at the threshold, present and sourceless and patient in the way it was always patient. She stood in it and held her methodology and waited for the second vision. It did not come, not in 2 hours, not in the form she was waiting for. A clear signal, an independent confirmation, a second data point that would give her the authority to go further. What came instead was ordinary sensation, cold air from the cave interior, the smell of deep rock, the sound, and the quality of attention redirection that she had documented in every session, the way thinking curved back toward the sound before arriving at its destination. She waited until she was certain the second vision was not coming. Then she turned. She walked up the switchback path. She sat among the stones. The wind was not blowing. This was unusual. The highland wind came down from the mountain passes every morning. It had come every morning since she had begun this posting. It was one of the constants she had built her baseline around, one of the background conditions that existed before the observation period began and that she had expected to continue throughout it. The morning was still. The cave entrance below was visible in the complete silence, more visible somehow without the wind, more present. The dark interior, not softened by the acoustic effect that wind over the cave mouth produced. She sat among the stones in the stillness. She did not open her recording surface. She did not write anything. She sat with what she had decided and what she had not decided, and the weight of both. On the other side of Voss Varric was checking the seal on his equipment case. It was a physical action, precise and methodical. The equipment went in a specific order. Field documentation first, then personal items, then operational tools. He had packed and unpacked this case on 11 postings. The order was automatic. The hands knew what to do without the mind directing them. His departure was set for 3 days hence. The extraction transport would arrive at the ascendant hour. He would sign out of the Voss facility. He would return his temporary authorization credentials to the Voss Commando administrative desk. This was protocol, required of all outsiders at the conclusion of their posting. He would board the transport. He would leave Voss. He had been here 26 days. He was not the same person who had arrived. He did not know precisely what the difference was. He could describe the external changes, the damaged field log, the blank conclusion columns, the crossed entries from the deeper chambers. He could describe the internal one that he could not locate clean language for, the sense of a very low cycling sound at the back of his auditory processing that was present whether or not there was wind, whether or not he was near the cave, whether or not he was on Voss at all. He did not know yet whether it would follow him off the planet. He suspected it would. He wrote this in the observation column. I suspect the acoustic effect has embedded in auditory processing. And then looked at the conclusion column and wrote, this is a conclusion wearing the clothes of an observation. He closed the log. He sealed the equipment case. Among the stones, the tilted one at its slow angle, the others around it, the highland morning moving into midday, the cold pulling back incrementally from its overnight position, the light shifting across the mountain rock faces in the way it always did. Sorveth sat. Below her the cave entrance was still. The dark interior held. The silence, unusual, windless, complete, wrapped around the highland in a way that made the stone circle feel very small and very exposed and very precisely itself. She had made her decision. She had gone to the threshold. She had not gone further. Both of these were true simultaneously. She would carry both. She opened her recording surface. She wrote in the observation column, I stood at the threshold for 2 hours. The second vision did not come. I returned to the stones. She looked at the conclusion column. She wrote, I do not know if this was the right decision. I know it was the honest one. She closed the record. The stone circle was around her. The tilted stone had not moved. The cave below was unchanged, its dark interior, its still mouth, its patient presence in the highland earth. Everything that had happened in the space between Chapter 1 and this moment had not touched the stones. They were simply there, as they had always been, as they would be when she was gone. The wind remained still. The silence held. The weight of what had been decided and not decided settled into the highland earth in the way that permanent things settle. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but completely, without the possibility of being unsettled. The work of ending a posting is not dramatic. It is administrative. It is the accumulation of small, precise tasks, each one unremarkable individually, each one necessary, each one carrying the particular quality of finality that comes not from significance, but from sequence. This is the last review. This is the last supplemental filing. This is the last time this document will be opened by the person who kept it. Varric understood this kind of work. He was good at it. He began on the first of his 3 remaining days at the ascendant hour and did not stop until the dark vigil. The re-review took most of the first day. He went through the field log from the beginning, not the way he had reviewed it after the deeper chambers, which had been an attempt to understand what had happened to it. This was different. This was the formal closing review that intelligence protocol required before a field log was submitted as part of a mission record. Reading each entry for completeness, checking dates against the operational timeline, flagging anything that required supplemental documentation. There was a great deal that required supplemental documentation. He created a separate document for the supplemental observations, everything he had recorded in the observation column that he could not move to the conclusion column because the record did not support a conclusion. He had a notation for this. He had never used it on a previous posting because he had never had a posting that required it on this scale. No reliable conclusion available. Sure, he wrote it beside 17 separate observations. The acoustic effect in the mid-chambers, the 4 unaccounted hours, the 3 places where the columns had exchanged content, the quality of attention redirection he had documented at the cave perimeter, the specific way the cycling sound had changed between the outer and deeper chambers, the question of whether what he had experienced was a property of the cave or a property of his own cognition after sufficient exposure to the cave. 17 observations, 17 notations of no reliable conclusion available. He filed the supplemental document alongside the main log. He did not feel that this was failure. He was not entirely sure what he felt about it. The preliminary filing went to his handler at the command meridian hour on the second day. It was thorough. It covered everything. The mission parameters, both the original ones and the updated ones, had asked him to assess. It was organized in the correct format. It was accurate. It was also, as he had assessed it would be, a partial account of something he did not fully understand. The response came back within 3 hours. 1 line. Unsatisfactory in scope. Analysis needed, not raw observation. He read it once. He read it again. He set the datapad down on the desk beside his field log. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up a fresh sheet of plain paper, the thinking paper, the kind he destroyed after, and he wrote a response. He wrote, "I am sending what the record supports. I am not sending conclusions the record does not support." He looked at this for a long time. It was accurate. It was the most precise statement of his position that he could construct. It said exactly what needed to be said. He read it one more time. He destroyed it. He drafted a revised preliminary acknowledgement. The revised version was 7 lines, professional in tone, empty in content. It thanked his handler for the assessment, noted that he would review the scope parameters prior to final submission, and confirmed his departure timeline. It committed to nothing. It contradicted nothing. It said nothing that was false. It said nothing that was true either. He sent it. He sat at the desk afterward, with the particular hollowness of a person who has chosen the professional language over the honest one, and knows both what the choice costs and why they made it anyway. He had made this kind of choice before. It had never left exactly this specific residue. The handoff documentation took the rest of the second day. This was the record he was leaving for whoever came after him. The next operative, the next mission, whatever Imperial intelligence decided to do with Voss after his partial account was reviewed, and the division determined it was insufficient and sent someone else. He wrote the handoff document with the same precision he brought to everything. He described the Voss Commando protocols at the cave perimeter. He described the diplomatic access framework and its actual operational limitations. He described the Republic team's relational advantage and the linguistic gap that had allowed it. He described the acoustic effect at each distance from the cave entrance, with his best available measurements. He described the quality of the mid-chambers as accurately as his damaged record permitted. He did not describe what the cave had done to his field log. He described his own experience of the deeper chambers as operationally significant sensory data, partially unrecoverable due to documentation disruption during the session. Recommend that subsequent operatives maintain audio recording as backup to written notation. This was the most honest framing the handoff documents format permitted. He filed it. He began packing. The packing took the first half of the third day. It was the same order as always. Field documentation first, the field log, the supplemental observations, the handoff document, the mission briefing with its redacted block on page 17, then personal items, then operational tools. He picked up the field log before placing it in the case. He held it for a moment. It was the same log he had carried into every previous posting. The same worn cover, the same binding, the same physical weight in his hand. What was different was the weight of what was inside it. Not literally. The paper weighed what paper weighed. But the account it held was heavier than any previous account. And the heaviness was not from what was in it, but from what was not. The blank conclusion columns, the mixed entries, the 17 observations with no reliable conclusion available. He thought about Mira reading it. He thought about her finding the places where the columns had crossed and marking them in her careful way. This is an interpretation wearing the clothes of an observation. He thought about what she would find that he had not. He placed the log in the case. He sealed it. On his last morning, before the transport arrived, he walked to the edge of the diplomatic zone, not toward the cave. The cave was in the other direction, up the highland path, past the perimeter markers, past the commando positions. He walked in the direction the zone permitted, to the boundary line where the diplomatic authorization ended and the broader Voss territory began. He stood at the boundary. He looked toward the highlands. From here, he could not see the cave entrance. The mountain faces rose in the middle distance, grey and layered and entirely indifferent to the presence of anyone looking at them. The stone circle above Sel-Makor was not visible from this angle. The perimeter markers were not visible. The cave itself was not visible. He could not hear anything unusual. The highland morning was doing what highland mornings did. The cold pulling back, the light moving across the rock faces, the distant sounds of Voss beginning its day behind him. He stood in the ordinary of it and was aware, in the specific way he had been aware since coming out of the deeper chambers. The awareness that had not left him in the days since, that he had checked for at the end of each day like checking a wound. Of a very low cycling tone at the edge of his hearing. He stood still and listened to it. He could not confirm it was external. He could not confirm it was internal. He was not sure anymore that the distinction held the way it had held before he went into the cave. He was not sure the distinction had ever held as cleanly as his training had taught him to treat it. The observation column recorded what was outside. The conclusion column processed what the mind made of what was outside. But what happened when the outside had gotten into the processing layer? When the mechanism of recording had been touched by the thing being recorded? He did not have a notation for this. He had 17 observations with no reliable conclusion available. And then he had this, which was not even an observation. It was the awareness of not knowing where the observation ended. The transport's approach signal would come soon. He stood at the boundary and listened to the sound that was or was not there until it was time to go. Sorveth's final days of authorized observation work looked nothing like a conclusion. They looked like what they were, the careful, thorough work of closing a record that did not want to be closed. She had been keeping the Sel-Makor observation archive for 3 months, 67 vision records, 41 cave session entries, outer chamber only, the mid-chambers beyond her authorization. the inner chamber beyond her decision. Every two-column notation, every place the columns had held and every place they had not, every entry where she had written something in the space between the columns, because neither column could hold it correctly. She organized the archive chronologically. Then she organized it a second way, by column integrity. The entries where both columns were clean and separate. The entries where the line between them had blurred. The entries in the space between. 3 categories. She did not assign value to the categories. She simply sorted. The sorting took a full day. What she had at the end was a picture of a methodology working under pressure, holding in most places, yielding in specific ones, never fully failing, but never fully adequate either. A tool that had been built for ordinary mystic work, encountering something that was not ordinary. Mystic work and doing what tools do under those conditions. Performing, straining, performing again, leaving marks where the strain had been. She looked at the sorted archive. She began writing the formal summary. The summary was the most difficult document she had ever produced. Not because she did not know what to say, because she knew exactly what to say and was not certain the Voss mystic tradition had ever received a document that said it. She wrote, "I cannot confirm that the visions I received during this observation period were uncompromised." She wrote, "I cannot confirm that they were compromised." She wrote, "I can describe, in detail, what each vision contained and what uncertainty surrounds it. I offer this record not as guidance, but as documentation." She looked at these 3 sentences. They were the most honest sentences she had ever written. They were also a formal acknowledgement that the tradition's core framework, the binary of true and corrupted, the reliable mystic sight, the 3,000 years of confirmable vision, had encountered something it could not fully account for. She was not saying the framework was wrong. She was saying the framework had edges, that she had found one, that the edge was real and the record of it was here, and someone should know. She submitted the summary to the Elder Mystic Council the following morning. The audience was brief. The 3 elders read the summary. They read the archive index. Vel, who carries the first stone, read both twice. Then they were silent for a long time. Zorveth waited. She was good at waiting. She had become better at it over 3 months of standing at cave entrances and sitting among stones and holding methodology under conditions it had not been designed for. Waiting was not passive. It was its own kind of precision. The discipline of not filling silence with words it did not need. Vel said, "Keep the record." She said it in the same economy of language she used for everything significant. Then she added, "Store it separately from standard vision archives. Mark it clearly as the work of the Sel-Makor observation period." Zorveth said, "The methodology, the second column, keep that too," Vel said, not an endorsement. The eldest's voice carried no warmth toward the second column, no suggestion that the qualification practice was being adopted or approved, but also no dismissal. The same quality she had shown in the elder audience, the willingness to hold something at arm's length rather than set it down. Goreth said nothing. Amundrath said, "Your honesty is noted." This was all. Zorveth inclined her head. She left the archive with the council. She walked back through the mystic administrative complex into the Highland morning, which was cold and ordinary and entirely indifferent to what had just been decided inside. The morning of Verrick's departure, the month of Perpetuis, year 23 of the Imperial Reckoning, the administrative month, the month of census and planning, the month when the Empire took stock of what it had and where it stood and what came next, an appropriate month to leave. The transport arrived at the ascendant hour precisely. Varric was at the landing platform with his sealed equipment case and his signed-out authorization credentials, and the particular blankness of expression that departure produces in people who have learned not to perform their departures. He signed the Voss Commando exit log. He handed back his temporary authorization credentials. He walked up the transport ramp. He found his seat. He placed the equipment case in the secured storage. He looked at the viewport as the transport lifted, the smooth mechanical lift of a military vessel that did not linger over departures. The Voss Kai platform dropped away. The mountains rose into the viewport frame and then widened as the transport gained altitude. The highlands spreading out, the grey and amber of the mountain rock receding, the individual peaks becoming part of a range that became part of a world that became small and distant. He looked for the highland above Sel-Makor. He could not distinguish it from the surrounding terrain. He looked at the mountains for as long as they were visible, grey, layered, wholly indifferent to his departure. The transport entered the upper atmosphere. The mountains were gone. The same morning. Sorveth climbed the switchback path before the highland had fully lit. She had not planned this as a final visit. She did not know, climbing the path in the pre-dawn cold, with the twin moons still visible at the western edge of the sky, that this was the last time in this phase of her life she would make this climb. She would understand that later. At the time, it was simply what the morning called for. The stone circle, the practice, the record. She sat among the stones. She did not open her recording surface. She sat. The highland brightened around her in the slow, comprehensive way it brightened at this hour. The dark thinning at the upper edges, the rock faces emerging from the pre-dawn grey, the cave entrance 200 meters below, coming into visibility as the light reached it. She looked at the cave. The cave was unchanged. This was the thing about it. Through everything, through 67 vision records and 41 session entries, and 3 months of methodology under pressure, the cave itself had not changed. The dark interior held. The grey mouth was what it had always been. The switchback path below was the same path. The stone around the entrance was the same stone. Whatever the cave had done had not been done to the cave. She sat with this. The highland morning moved into full light around her, and then, faintly, carried across the highland air from the direction of Voss Commando, the sound of a transport ascending. She heard it without turning toward it. The sound grew slightly, peaked, and then diminished. The specific arc of a vessel gaining altitude, the sound doppling into distance, the highland air closing over it the way water closes over a stone. And then it was gone. The highland was quiet. The cave was below her. The stones were around her, the tilted one at its slow angle. She sat in the quiet for a long time after the transport sound was gone, looking at the cave entrance with the expression of someone who has spent 3 months looking at something and understands, now, that looking at it was never going to be sufficient, was always going to leave her exactly here, sitting above it, holding a record that was accurate and incomplete and honest and not enough. She did not look away. She did not close her eyes. She looked at the cave. The cave did not look back. Or if it did, she could not confirm it. She had learned to hold both possibilities. She held them now. Time does not heal the specific kind of damage Sel-Makor inflicts. It does not worsen it either. It simply continues. The way the highland continues. The way the wind continues. The way the cave continues to breathe in the mountain, passes before the settlement wakes. The damage becomes part of the person, the way old weather becomes part of old stone. Not visible from a distance. Present in the texture when you get close enough to touch it. Sorveth of the Third Dreaming returned to her ordinary work. This is what survival looks like, most of the time. Not recovery, not resolution. The return to ordinary work, the smaller visions, the patrol confirmations, the daily practice of sitting with whatever the night had brought and recording it carefully in both columns. The work that had existed before the observation period and that continued after it, with the same requirements and the same rhythms and the same need for precision. She met those requirements. She maintained those rhythms. She was precise. What was different? What had been different since the fourth entry into the outer chamber, since the vision in the deep session, since the elder audience and the filing of the summary, and the morning she had sat among the stones listening to a transport ascend toward orbit, was the second column. It was heavier now, not longer necessarily, not more words. Heavier in the way a tool becomes heavy after it has been used under conditions it was not designed for. The weight of knowing what it had been asked to hold and what it had and had not been adequate to hold. She wrote in it every day. She maintained the separation. She qualified every vision with the same careful language she had developed during the observation period. The vision shows X. The vision may mean Y. The vision may mean something I am not yet equipped to understand. She did not know, most mornings, whether the qualification was the most honest thing she could do, or whether it was a form of permanent hesitation that had disguised itself as methodology. She held both possibilities. She had become very good at holding both possibilities. She was not sure this was the same thing as being at peace with them. The Voss tradition received her return with the specific quality of reception it reserved for things it did not know how to categorize, not celebration. The observation period had not produced guidance, had not generated a clear mystic vision that could be acted on, had not resolved the question of what Sel-Makor was, or what the outsider presence meant, or what the Voss should do about either. It had produced a record, a very careful, very honest, very qualified record that the Elder Archive had filed separately from standard vision archives and marked clearly as the work of the Sel-Makor observation period. Records were not nothing. The Voss tradition understood that records had value, that the archive was a living thing, that what was preserved now might illuminate something decades hence that could not be illuminated in the present. But records were not guidance, and what the Voss needed from their mystics, consistently and primarily, was guidance. Sorveth provided it. She continued receiving visions that guided patrol routes and resource allocation and the management of Gormak perimeter incidents. She was accurate. She was reliable. Her verification rate, the metric by which mystic sight was measured against outcomes, held at the level it had been before the observation period. The Elder Council noted this. They did not comment on it directly. The noting was itself a form of communication. The Voss tradition did not always require words for significant things. What the tradition did require, what it had always required, was that a mystic whose sight had been questioned remained demonstrably functional. Sorveth remained demonstrably functional. This was the criterion. She met it. She was not celebrated for the observation period record. She was not disciplined for the second column. She existed in the tradition as a mystic who had come back from the cave changed, which was noted, archived, and treated with the respectful wariness the Voss applied to things they understood they did not fully understand. This was its own kind of recognition. She learned to accept it as such. The vision came 7 months after the observation period ended. It came at first light, the transition hour, the way strong visions came. She had been awake for the previous hour, reviewing records, which was her ordinary morning practice. The review had been unremarkable. 3 patrol confirmations, 1 resource allocation guidance, 1 minor path question from a commando unit operating in the Northern Highland sector. She set the review aside at first light. She closed her eyes. The vision arrived. It was the clearest vision she had received since before the observation period. Both columns clear, sight and meaning, aligning without the interference, without the blurring, without the quality of attention redirection that Sel-Makor had installed in her peripheral cognition, like a slow frequency she had learned to account for, but never fully eliminated. The clarity was so complete that she held it at arm's length for a moment before trusting it. The trained wariness of someone who has documented that clarity can be constructed as well as genuine. She looked at it carefully. The 3 genuine markers were present. The opening quality of arrival, the internal visual coherence, the cellular certainty in the body. She looked for the counter-indicators, the pressure quality, the instability in detail, just the sense of something being pushed toward her rather than opening. She looked carefully. They were not there. She held the vision and looked at it from every angle her methodology could reach. It held. She opened her recording surface. The vision showed her the stone circle. That was all it showed. Not a sequence of events, not a person in crisis, not a path decision or a resource question or a patrol route. The stone circle above the Sel-Makor cave entrance. The dark grey highland rock, the specific arrangement that predated all living memory. The tilted stone at its slow angle. The cave entrance below, 200 meters of slope between the stones and the dark mouth. The highland around everything. The morning light, early, just beginning to reach the lower elevations. The vision showed this and nothing else. It did not show anyone standing among the stones. It did not show the cave doing anything. No sound indicated, no frequency visible. Just the dark interior held in the ordinary way the cave held its dark. The highland was empty of persons. The stones were simply there. The cave was simply below them. That was the entire vision. She wrote in the observation column, "The stones are there. The cave is below them. The highland is around them." She looked at the conclusion column. A vision this clear. Both columns aligning. All 3 genuine markers present, the counter-indicators absent, would normally produce a conclusion in the right column. A guidance statement. Something the vision was telling her to do, or to know, or to communicate to those who needed direction. She wrote, "I do not know what this means. I believe it is true." She looked at this conclusion. It was not a guidance conclusion. It was not actionable. It did not tell anyone anything they could use to make a decision or change a course or protect something that needed protection. It was simply the most honest thing she could write. She marked the vision as pending verification, her standard notation for a vision whose accuracy she intended to confirm against external conditions when possible. The following morning, she climbed the switchback path. The stones were there. The cave was below them. The highland was around them, exactly as described. She stood among the stones for a long time without opening her recording surface. The morning was doing what mornings did on Voss at this time of year. The month of Velshar, the month of stone waking, when the highland rocks warmed after the cold season and the passes cleared of the ice that had closed them through the longest months. The cold was pulling back from its overnight position. The light was moving across the rock faces in the specific way it moved at this latitude in this season. The tilted stone was at its angle. She had not measured the angle during the observation period. She wished, standing here now, that she had. She would have liked to know whether it had moved, even fractionally, even in the way that stone moves under its own weight over years and decades, whether the slow lean had continued. She had no baseline measurement. She could not determine whether it had moved. She noted this without distress. The inability to determine something was information. The absence of a baseline was a property of the record, and the record was honest about its own gaps. She marked the vision as verified in her recording surface. The stones were where the vision had shown them. The vision was accurate. Its meaning remained open. She wrote beneath the verification notation, in very small script at the bottom of the record, a vision that shows only what is already there, without guidance or path or question to answer. I do not have a category for this. I am creating one. I will call it a confirmation vision. A vision that does not direct. A vision that simply confirms that something exists, that it is still there, that the record of its existence is true. She closed the record. She looked at the cave entrance below. She looked at the stones around her. She sat for a while longer. Then she went back down the path toward Voss Commando, and the morning continued. And the stones remained, as they had always remained, in the highland that had always held them, above the cave that had always been below. Varric Thane requested his new posting before his transport had cleared Voss orbit. Not because there was urgency, because he had known, sitting at the diplomatic zone boundary on his last morning, listening to the sound that was or was not there at the edge of his hearing, that he needed to be somewhere that was not quiet, that the specific quality of Voss Highland's silence was not something he could afford to carry into a posting that would require him to sit in quiet rooms and produce clean analysis. The request cited operational preference, strong preference for active hub assignment, high-volume intelligence environment, continuous operational tempo. His handler approved it without comment. The hub was on a mid-tier imperial world called Veridis, a communications and logistics center that ran at full capacity around every cycle of the clock. The building he worked in had ambient sound at all hours. The circulation of personnel, the movement of cipher traffic, the physical machinery of an operational center that processed more intelligence in one day than the Voss posting had processed in its entire duration. He arrived and understood immediately that it was what he needed. Not because it was better than quiet, because it was louder than the sound. He was promoted within the first year. The promotion was for analysis work, a case file he had worked on for 6 months that produced actionable intelligence used in 3 subsequent operations. His handler's assessment used the word meticulous. It used the word reliable. It used the phrase exceptional column discipline, which was not standard Imperial intelligence performance language, but which his handler had apparently developed independently to describe the quality of Varric's analytical records. He was promoted a second time 14 months after the first. This promotion was administrative, a seniority recognition, a title change, a responsibility expansion that added 6 junior analysts to his oversight. He trained them in the 2-column format. He did not explain where the format had come from. He taught it as methodology, which it was. He was good at the work. He was, by any external measure, successful. He lived inside noise and production and the continuous operational tempo he had requested, and the work was good, and the promotions were deserved, and nothing about his professional life was broken or diminished or less than what it had been before Voss. What was different was interior. What was different was the private log. The private log was not the official field log. The official field log was meticulous. Both columns maintained, separation rigorous, conclusions supported by observations, the record clean and reliable, and exactly what his handler meant by exceptional column discipline. The private log was what he kept for himself. He had maintained it since early in his career, a practice that Imperial intelligence neither required nor prohibited, a personal document with no operational status, no submission requirement, no oversight. It was where he wrote what the official log could not hold: the thinking work, the questions, the things that were true but not supportable in the record's format. Since Voss, the private log had a recurring entry. He had written it in different forms on different nights, sometimes long, sometimes one sentence, always beginning in the same place and always arriving at the same destination. He would begin, "On Voss, in the deeper chambers of Sel-Makor, I experienced," and then he would write what he had experienced, or what he thought he had experienced, or what his observation column had recorded in the 4 hours he could not account for, or what his conclusion column had crossed into the observation column to say in the 3 places where the columns had exchanged content. He would write it in full. He would read it. He would delete it. Not because it was false, because he could not determine whether it was false, because the specific damage Sel-Makor had done to his column discipline was precisely this. Not the ability to observe, not the ability to conclude, but the ability to be certain which column he was in at any given moment. And a record he could not assign to a column with confidence was a record he could not keep with integrity. He had deleted 7 attempts. He had stopped attempting. He had not stopped thinking about what the summary would say if he could write one that he could trust. Some nights, at the edge of sleep, in the operational hub's never complete quiet, he would hear it, low, cycling, at the back of his auditory processing where he had learned to expect it. He had long since stopped trying to determine whether it was external or internal. The distinction, as he had noted on his last morning on Voss, no longer held the way his training had taught him to treat it. He had learned to sleep in spite of it. He had learned to work in spite of it. He had learned over years to carry it the way a person carries something they have accepted they will not put down. Not with resignation, with the specific kind of accommodation that comes from understanding that the thing being carried is permanent, and that life can be full and functional and meaningful alongside a permanent thing, even a heavy one. He was not broken. He was not the same. Both of these were true simultaneously. He had made peace in his own way with holding both. The galaxy moved through its seasons and its conflicts and its political machinery. The Cold War between the Republic and the Empire continued its slow, grinding, unresolved tension. The war that was not officially a war. The peace that was not genuinely peace. The state of suspended hostility that both sides maintained because open conflict had costs. Neither was prepared to pay again so soon. Voss remained neutral. The Voss mystics continued receiving visions and guiding their people and maintaining the archive that held, in a separately marked section, the records of the Sel-Makor observation period. The 2-column format persisted in Sorveth's work. It was not adopted formally by the tradition. It was not prohibited. It existed in the record as the methodology of one mystic during one specific period, preserved honestly, available to whoever came after, and needed to understand what that period had been. The Republic and Imperial diplomatic presences on Voss continued their careful, friction-laden, ultimately inconclusive efforts to bring the Voss into alignment with their respective interests. Neither side succeeded. The Voss continued to receive both, use neither, and guard their neutrality with the particular effectiveness of a people who have understood for a very long time that neutrality, properly maintained, is its own form of power. The Gormak continued their incursions. The commandos continued their rotations at the Sel-Makor perimeter. The incident raid, soldiers stationed at the cave perimeter for more than 6 consecutive days, reporting the acoustic effect in the silences between things, reporting it when the wind was not blowing, reporting it in their sleep, was noted in medical officer filings and addressed with rotation schedule adjustments that kept most soldiers below the 6-day threshold. Most. The cave did not change. It breathed in the highland wind the way it had always breathed. It waited in the way that things wait when they are not measuring time, the way the people near them measure time. It was patient in a way that was not patience, in the way that stone is patient, in the way that dark is patient, in the way that something that has been in one place for longer than living memory has a relationship to time that makes the word patient inadequate but available. In the month of Velshar, in a year that fell some time after the events of this account, 2 Voss Commandos stood their watch at the Sel-Makor perimeter. They were young soldiers, both under 30, both well within their first full rotation at this posting. Their equipment was current issue, their training was thorough. Their records showed nothing remarkable. Good soldiers, reliable, no history of irregularity. They had been stationed at this perimeter for 4 days. At the end of the 4th day, they had learned, the way all soldiers at this posting learned, that the stone circle above the cave entrance was the best meeting point for shift handoff, high enough that the cave's acoustic effect was not audible, solid landmark, good sight lines across the highland approach paths, the kind of position that a trained soldier recognized immediately as a superior observation point. They met at the stones for the shift handoff at the ascendant hour. The highland was doing what the highland did in Velshar. The month of stone waking, the cold pulling back, the rock faces warming after the long season. The light was strengthening across the mountain terrain in the slow, comprehensive way that Voss light strengthened at this latitude. They stood among the stones. The tilted one was at its angle. They faced outward, their backs to the cave, their attention on the highland approaches, the perimeter, the sight lines. This was correct positioning. This was what the assignment required. They completed the handoff, standard exchange, post conditions, anomaly report, equipment status, no irregularities. The previous 4 days had been ordinary, routine commando movements, standard diplomatic personnel in the authorized zones, no unusual activity at the cave perimeter. The incoming soldier noted the handoff in the watch log. The outgoing soldier gathered her equipment. Before she left, she paused. She looked out across the highland, the grey and amber of the mountain rock, the Voss settlement in the middle distance, the sky above still carrying the pink-grey of early morning at the edges. The incoming soldier said, "What?" She said, "Nothing. It's quiet up here." The incoming soldier said, "Wind's down." "Yeah." She looked at the highland for another moment. Then she went down the path toward the settlement, and her shift was done, and the morning continued. The incoming soldier turned back to the highland approaches. The stones were around him, the tilted one at his back, the cave below. 3 records exist of what happened at Sel-Makor in the period covered by this account. The first is the Imperial Intelligence Mission file for the Voss posting, classified, partially accessible under subsequent archival review protocols, containing a field log with damaged sections and 17 observations marked "No reliable conclusion available." and a supplemental document that a reviewing auditor described as unusually thorough and operationally insufficient. The second is the Sel-Makor observation archive maintained in the Voss Mystic records, separately stored, clearly marked, comprising 67 vision records and 41 session entries in a 2-column format that the tradition had not used before and has not formally adopted since. Maintained by one mystic whose name is attached in the archive index and whose methodology is preserved without endorsement or condemnation. The third is the Voss Commando log for the perimeter assignment during this period. The flat recording stone with its entry marks and exit marks. The 5 entries and 3 exits of the inner chamber incident, preserved in simple vertical and horizontal lines, stored in the Voss archive under a classification designation that translates approximately as events between the individual and the force. These 3 records exist. They have been consulted when they have been consulted by people trying to understand what Sel-Makor is and what it does, and whether it can be used, or whether it can be contained, or whether it is simply a property of the world that must be accounted for rather than resolved. None of these people have found a 4th record. None of them have found an account that resolves the inconsistencies between the 3 that exist. The 3 records agree on nothing except the silence that followed. And the stones. They agree on the stones. The tilted one is still there. The cave is still there below it. The highland is still around everything. The grey and amber of the mountain rock, the passes that clear in Velshar and close again in Gorothshar. The cold that pulls back each morning and returns each night, with the particular reliability of something that has been doing this long enough that reliability is no longer the right word for it. The wind still comes down from the mountain, passes in the early morning before the settlement wakes. It still moves through the outer chambers of Sel-Makor, in the way that wind moves through openings in rock. At certain angles, it still produces a sound, low, cycling. Soldiers stationed at the perimeter for more than 6 consecutive days still hear it in the silences between things. They still hear it when the wind is not blowing. They still hear it when they are trying to sleep. Medical officers still file incident reports. The reports still use different clinical language. They still describe the same symptom. This has been true for as long as there have been soldiers stationed at the perimeter and medical officers to receive their reports. It will be true for as long as there are. Somewhere in the galaxy, in a posting that is loud enough to hold what quiet cannot, a man sits at a desk with 2 columns open in front of him. The observation column is full. The conclusion column is almost full. Both are meticulous. Both are the work of someone who has spent years maintaining a discipline that costs more than it used to cost and that he has never stopped maintaining. At the bottom of the conclusion column, below the day's last entry, there is a space. He looks at the space. He does not write in it. He closes the log. He goes to the window of his quarters, which looks out not on highland and mountain, but on the lit grid of a mid-tier imperial world at operational tempo. The permanent, comprehensive, never fully silent sound of a place that is always working. He listens to it. It is sufficient. Most nights, it is sufficient. And in the highland above the Sel-Makor cave entrance, in the early morning of the month of Velshar, a mystic climbs the switchback path before the settlement wakes. She has made this climb many times. She will make it many more. She sits among the stones. She opens her recording surface. She writes in both columns what she saw, what she thinks it means. And the hand that writes is steady and precise, and carries in its steadiness the weight of everything that preceded it. every session, every entry, every place the columns held, and every place they did not, every morning above the cave. Every vision qualified with the language of honest uncertainty. The vision shows X. The vision may mean Y. The vision may mean something I am not yet equipped to understand. She writes this every morning. She has written it so many times that the language has become the practice, and the practice has become who she is. Below her, the cave entrance is what it has always been. The dark interior held, the mouth open to the morning air, the wind beginning its descent from the passes. She writes until she is done. Then she closes the record. She does not look at the cave. She looks at the stones around her. The dark grey highland rock, the specific arrangement that has been here longer than anyone has needed to count. The tilted one at its slow angle. The others where they have always been. She looks at them the way she looks at everything now, with both columns open, with the honest uncertainty of someone who has been looking at something for a long time and understands that looking, carefully and honestly and without the expectation of resolution, is the work, not the conclusion. The work. The highland brightens around her. The stones warm in the first light. The cave breathes. The record remains open. That is what was left. That is what has always been left. That is what will be and is and was before any of this began. The recording ends here.